engine.
There's no.
Today's episode of Shockwaves is brought to you by Shudder.
Brought to you by AMC Network, Shudder is not only a premium streaming video service, but an experience unlike any other. Created for fans of all degrees of thrillers, suspense, and horror, Shudder is the home to the largest and fastest growing human-curated selection of high-quality, spine-tingling, and provocative films, TV series, and originals. And there's always something new and unexpected for Shudder members to explore.
New to Shudder is Neil Gaiman's Likely Stories, adapted from the dark tales of author Neil Gaiman. This collection of distinct, odd, and brilliant short stories is both cinematic and strange. In each film, each character is compelled to share their story, and we're drawn into their very act of telling tall tales. While each episode has its own lead character, they are backed by an ensemble cast that play across all 4 bold and original films. If you enjoyed American Gods, Coraline, or Stardust, you'll love Neil Gaiman's Likely Stories.
Shudder is available for $4.99 a month or $49.99 with an annual membership. But our listeners can get the free month by entering promo code SHOCK at checkout. That is, entering SHOCK at checkout will get you a free month of Shudder.
Go to Shudder.com today and find the best collection of thrillers, suspense, and horror available to stream anywhere.
Okay, and welcome to episode number 65 of Shockwaves. I'm your host, Rob Galluzzo. Sitting with me is Mr. Elric Kane.
Hi there, Rob.
What's up, buddy? How are you?
Man, tired as shit, but I'm looking forward to this.
Are you? Okay, great.
This will be good. We got good stuff to talk about.
Yeah.
We do. A lot of stuff to talk about. Also with us, Rebekah McKendry.
Hello, guys.
Hello. And Go
sorry.
ahead.
I was going to say.
What were you going to say?
I am not tired as shit. I'm kind of there, but good stuff to talk about.
She's shit-ass tired.
I'm shit-ass tired.
Hashtag shit-ass tired. Welcome to the show, Ryan Turek.
Hey, I'm
Co-host,
just tired of all the shit in the world, man.
Tired? Wow. You have reason to be tired because you had a hell of a weekend.
It was pretty kooky
which
bananas.
we'll delve into. This will be our tribute to George Romero, finally. As a lot of people have been asking us to do something proper. And the week that he had passed, we were actually a few weeks ahead in our recording schedule. It's just kind of the way it happened. And literally after that, I think Elric was out one week and then Ryan was out one week. And we felt it was only appropriate for all 4 of us to be back to do a proper tribute to George. It was the only way we can do it. But first, as always, the latest horrors. And I just want to kick it off by saying congrats to Ryan. Slashback video kicked off at the Mystic Museum in Burbank.
Saturday night.
And it was great. It was huge. Huge event, huge turnout. A lot of fun. I mean, we were fortunate we got to see it without 2,000 people in it.
Yeah, it was nice to see it in advance because had I just walked in on that with the 2,000 people, I think you got to go back when it's a little more quiet to get the full video experience.
Well, now it seems like I've seen a lot of friends go in the afternoon and like just take their time, play a little Splatterhouse.
Some people have returned. I've seen via the hashtag Slashback video that people have. They went Saturday night to the opening reception, and then they were like, wow, it was really crazy busy there, and I missed all these details, and then they went back.
That's cool.
So that was really cool. Yeah, we had close to 2,000 people go through there.
Oh, unbelievable.
Oh my gosh.
And the line wrapped around the building, down the alleyway,
the police
back
showed
around
up.
The cops, yeah.
Police did show up for the first 5 minutes because they were like, what is happening?
What are you doing here?
Clearly, you're doing something crazy.
Eric, who was our guest last week from Mystic Museum, broke out all the paperwork that she needed to see, and she was just like, okay, yeah, you guys did everything you were supposed to do.
Yeah.
Good luck.
That's awesome.
But it was
not their first rodeo. No big deal.
Yeah.
And someone told me, I was absolutely amazed. I got kind of stuck back in the video store, and I didn't wander out much from there, much like my video store days. But somebody told me that it was like an hour and a half wait just to get there, and people waited an hour to 2 hours just to walk through. And I guys, I applaud every single one of you who actually went through. Thank you so much. reception to it was a lot bigger than I expected.
Yeah.
I thought because it was such a niche thing, going through a video store and just looking at video boxes. And
it's overload because it's all horror.
It is.
You know what I mean? So it's like we would always look for that one little tiny section in a video store, but you go in there and like the detail on every angle, you're just like,
we want layers. It's layers.
I've had people who write to me saying, "Oh man, like I don't see Possession or Soul Survivor on your shelf, Elric. Do you want me to send you a copy?" And I'm just like, "Oh, I didn't actually pick my shelf. I just gave some tape. They wouldn't necessarily be my favorite."
Oh, I know.
Because they're listed as picks, and I'm like, it's not really my picks. It's just the only VHS I have.
Yeah.
Well,
Bekah's are almost my picks.
Yeah, mine are pretty close because I've got like Rawhead Rex on there. And the
I knew we were
Haunting
safe
of
with
Julia.
Bekah.
Yeah. But
it was nice
cool
of people.
because I was standing there, and like the way that it was working is you would like there was a line that was kind of flowing through the store in a very specific pattern, so you would kind of walk with these people, and we got to my picks, and I was like all excited about it and everything, and they were coming up, and I see this guy point down, and he goes, "I have that fucking tattoo," and he pulled back his arm, and he had a Rawhead Rex tattoo, and he goes, "Whoever this girl is, she kicks ass," and I was like, "That's me! I kick ass!"
Oh man,
yeah, it was really cool.
Rawhead
But,
Rex bringing people together.
Wow.
No one would have ever thought.
somebody else that was near us was immediately like, "You know what this place needs? A really schlubby looking guy judging everyone from behind the counter, and he doesn't move, and he barely looks up from his novel.
Oh, yeah.
He only looks up long enough to judge you, and then he looks back down." And I was like, "Yeah, Turek, go. You just need to stand there and do that the whole time."
I did stand back there quite a bit, but there was one guy who came up to me, and he goes, "So this is a thing, huh?" And I said, "What do you mean?" And he goes, "This was like yesterday, like video stores, man, like VHS tapes. It was like yesterday." I'm like, "Actually, sir, it wasn't really yesterday. It was a long time ago, and you're old." And he goes, "Ah, man,
Like
that's crazy.
30 years now.
Yeah, and he goes, and he says, "So what's the appeal?" And I was like, "Well, I said, yes, there are video stores that exist out there, but they're not all horror, and they're not all horror VHS tapes." And he goes, "Oh, okay, cool." And then he stuck around for another 20, 30 minutes. So I was very happy about that.
Well, me and Elric got the opportunity to talk to a lot of people that listen to the show, and I think the biggest compliment that we can, I don't mean to turn the whole show into a freaking commercial, but the biggest compliment is, and why I think there was such a huge turnout is literally whether you were from Milwaukee or Ohio or New York or whatever, everyone said, "This was my video store."
Yeah.
Like everyone had a memory. It triggered that thing.
Yeah.
I think that's super cool, man. So
Yeah, we had people from Vegas, we had people from the Bay Area, we had people from San Diego, we had people from everywhere. I mean, like some people just made a long trek to get out there.
That's
It was great
awesome.
to meet all of our sponsors, but it was good stuff. And Elric, we're going to actually take you up on your idea, and we are going to reverse the boxes on Sundays.
Nice.
On Sundays, cool.
On Sunday, so people can, if they've already come through once and they have their membership card, and we're going to let them back in so then they can walk the floor
that
again.
is
Oh, that's
Cool.
super nice of you to not have to charge again. That's
Yeah,
great. That's great.
But if you've never been in there, you got to pay the fee. But it's going to be
Oh,
cool.
that's really
cool.
cool. Because there's a lot of them that, the ones you don't know, you really want to look at the back.
Yeah.
Like the ones you hadn't heard of
Yeah.
before.
And there were a
actually,
lot. Like I literally went through
Oh, yeah,
with my
tons.
cell phone and took probably 25 pictures, and then went home and like started queuing things up on Amazon. Of okay, next time I find myself with like 20 extra bucks, I'm going to blind buy this because the box cover kicked that much ass.
Yeah, cool.
So I'm excited to see some of the ones. I've already ordered Dead Easy, or as Ryan called it, Dead Sleazy,
Dead Sleazy.
which I have not seen before. So I'm psyched to check that one out.
Well, make sure you guys go on Spin It Over Sundays.
we got to find out. I got to make a graphic for it because I
gotta
got to
make
come up with
something
something.
better than
So.
We'll put some thought into that.
But it was what was great about it is the weekend was kicked off by a joining of every horror person in the community that I've ever known.
Long time since that. I mean,
It's been a
speaking of
long
nostalgia.
time. Yeah, under the ArcLight roof for the opening of it.
Yeah.
Except me, who was at an ice skating birthday party,
it's
but
busy.
then went to see it on Sunday.
But everyone's seen it.
We've seen it. We've
Yes,
all
we
seen
all
it.
went to
It's
see
great.
it.
So it's time to talk good.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
All right. Who wants to go? Brian, you go. I already given my thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I really liked it. I'm going to go see it again. We saw it at the Dome on opening night, and I just have issues with the Dome in general, from screen to sound. So I feel like I missed a lot of what the kids were saying because that movie is loud. It is very aggressive with a very muscular soundtrack that just like beats you over the head. But as far as a movie, I really enjoyed it. I will say that there is a moment at the end of the film in which our heroes all come together, and it's a moment of emotional complexity, and you're supposed to feel moved, and you're supposed to maybe shed a tear, and I didn't quite get there. And I'm still kind of dissecting why I didn't get there, why I didn't get to that moment where I just felt like all of my heartstrings tugged.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go check it out again with better sound. And for right now, I think it's a really, really fantastic, fun, kind of roller coaster horror movie. Very, very much different than the miniseries, because it was funny. I have my parents in town, and when I woke up the next morning and they were actually watching the miniseries on iTunes. So I came down and I was watching that, and they're very, very distinctly two different voices.
Oh yeah, very much
right
so.
down to what Andy Muschietti and Tommy Lee Wallace chose to rip from the book. I think the miniseries is a lot more faithful.
And
that's
been my debate lately.
And there's some,
and I questioned on the group because I really wanted, basically, like, look, I love all three entities, but I know the TV movie by heart.
Yeah.
And I'm listening to the audiobook of the book now, and I liked the movie when we saw it on Friday. That was my second time seeing the film.
Right.
And I still love it, but I don't think it's a perfect at it. Like, I'm surprised by how many people are saying, like, oh, it's so much like the book. Because now that I'm reading the audiobook, it is nothing like the book. They have taken a lot of liberties with this new movie, and yet somehow it tonally works, and people still keep referencing the book.
Also to a weird fault. I mean, also to a weird degree in terms of changing things, because it's like, I think it's like Mike Hanlon. He had a lot more to do. He was the kid who actually dove into the research, where it's like Ben who now does this.
Yeah.
He's the one who knows about the town more than anybody else. It was just some very weird things, Bekah.
Well, because it's been like, I read the book right after the TV miniseries came out when I was in middle school, early high school, but I have not read it since then. So were some of the smaller set pieces that were in the movie, in the book, like the Easter egg kid? Was that?
No, I think they did, again, they took a lot of liberties.
Or the painting, was the painting in the book?
No.
Okay, yeah, those were things that I thought.
Those were new additions.
There were a lot of those, and those are fine. Like, I'm totally, because that's the thing, is if I'm a diehard fan of the book, I want to be surprised.
Yeah.
I want to see something that I haven't seen before.
Adaptations don't often work for cinema.
Right.
You know?
And again, you're going to have I had a different experience the second time, because I accepted, like you said, Mike Hanlon and Ben switching that. It made sense. Like, all right, Ben's the new kid. He would want to know about the town.
Sure.
So when I was watching it the second time, because I wasn't thinking of the other materials, I was enjoying it as its own movie. It's not perfect, and it has its minor flaws, but for the most part, I think it's probably the most solid studio horror movie we've seen in years.
Yeah.
And it actually has some really terrifying moments. Like, the audience I saw it with was screaming at parts. They were cheering. Somebody was saying, like, don't fucking go in there at moments.
Yeah.
It was, like, phenomenal to hear the audience that energized and to hear
we
that
had a good audience. Ours, I mean, none of it scares me, but that's because
my mom lost her mind.
Oh, there was a couple moments.
the best jump scare ever.
Yeah.
Like when they're watching the projection.
Oh,
I mean,
my gosh, yes.
Because that's actually on point thematically with clown being like a jack-in-the-box. Like, it actually has a purpose. The biggest problem, I mean, look, I think this is one of the most entertaining movies I've seen in a long time. No, I took Selena, who never really goes to big horror anymore, and so I took her, and we both really loved it. You know, having little boys was interesting, because then, that's two characters are little boys, and that's tough to watch at the start of this movie to an extent, but it really pulls you in. I really love the way it's made. There's only my niggles didn't get in the way of my enjoyment at all. They're more like, okay, it'd be 100 times scarier if the clown could slowly approach the camera instead of running head over heels with the sound of it, because it actually takes away from his great performance. He is giving a great performance, but unfortunately the editing at times is getting in the way of letting that performance breathe, because if he was slowly coming towards you, you'd be terrified. Instead, it's always on. He's always on.
Yeah,
He's like a high personality.
It's funny because my concern initially when we heard about this is like, is he just going to be creepy the whole time, or is he going to be able to lure people? And in that sense, don't get me wrong, because I think Skarsgård is amazing in the movie. He's great as Pennywise. But the more I thought about it, I was like, I kind of like the Tim Curry one better because
again,
I
think it's
a different
voices.
approach.
Yeah, it's a different approach.
Because in this movie, it's very much like the book where Pennywise doesn't show up until after the scare. He first appears as something you're scared of, and then it's kind of like the wink at the end where it's like, oh, now he's the clown. So there's no need for him to lure you in, and that's why it's a weird balance for the Georgie scene. Because
more
like,
of
why would this kid talk to him?
Right.
And he's like, he plays it just enough where like, all right, he's not that creepy.
Yeah, he's not horribly creepy. And I guess if you're like, what's Georgie, like 5? I guess that it's understandable that maybe a 5-year-old would talk to a slightly sinister clown in a sewer.
Well, until he makes that one look, and then you're like, kid, you should run
that's
now,
the best.
Just go, dude.
That's the exact moment they do in Wolf Creek when Mick is talking to them, and then Mick freezes, and you see inside the mind for a second. I love that.
I think it's just like, great. I just felt like once the veil dropped and these kids knew it was a monster, then he acted like a monster throughout. And what I wanted, like you said, was more of the human being. You know, I wanted more human being type of Pennywise that was interacting with these kids. Tim Curry's approach was more of a, I'm going to sit down with you. I'm going to tell you everything I'm going to do to you. Not now, but later. Yeah. And I'm going to come after you. I'm going to come after your friends, and I'm going to do really bad shit to you. Whereas this one, it was like, I'm going to come out of the water and then, you know, and like boogie, boogie, boogie. And it's like, okay, that's all right. They ran away from that. And then the next scene, it was like boogie, boogie, boogie. And then they ran away. And it was like, okay, you're getting a little repetitive. Give me some escalation to Pennywise. And it wasn't
the structure's a little exhausting like that. Yeah. That's the way. But in a way, that's still great the first time, but you can see how you can run out of steam.
Yeah,
you know?
small little thing. Because, I mean, like, it got me every single time.
No, it worked. It worked beautifully. And again, that's why this is the closest I've ever seen a movie being a roller coaster. And that almost every 5 minutes they teed up some sort of scare or whatever, some sort of beat. I missed a lot of stuff from the original TV movie character-wise, but this is the weird thing. I've always argued like when everyone's like, oh, it's pretty good, but they're saving it for the sequel. And I always say that's a terrible critique because you shouldn't be thinking of the sequel. Yes. This is the one time where that actually makes sense. Yeah. It's like, because they got a lot of work cut out for them with Chapter 2. Yeah. And I'm hoping that some of the things that feel like they're off here, and I think that's one of the weird things about when the movie ends, you're kind of like, it feels like something's missing because you know that there's the adult segment. Yeah. And I can't confirm this, but I had heard that they already shot a ton of extra kid stuff. Yeah. It's because, you know, obviously they're going to probably age incredibly by the time they get. So maybe that stuff is missing because they're saving it for part 2 and. But, you know, so it'll be interesting to see how they approach the sequel.
I did really like the new approach to Bev in this one because in the TV movie, I don't remember her being in any way like as powerful as she was in this. Whereas in this one, she was the first one off the cliff.
She's the star of the movie, in my opinion. She owns this film.
And they use her to tease out kind of the boys' coming of age, which I don't remember being in the made-for-TV movie.
Because she does feel a lot older than them. I know it's just more of a maturity thing, but she feels taller, more mature, you know, everything. But also, she's been growing up faster because of her backstory. So I thought, look,
I miss them, but I miss her being like the one that is meant to sort of fight it, you know, without giving anything away.
Yeah. This one's a hard one without spoilers in general. Yeah. The one thing I really didn't like, and it's a problem in so many movies, but in this one I thought it was borderline ridiculous, was the level of the bullies when they first, I mean, when the one piece of violence they're doing, you're like, this is jumping 1,000 sharp. I mean, I'm sorry.
But that's, if you're talking about Ben, that's in the book.
You're talking about them.
Yeah, but it's...
And I was actually upset
when you read something, but so is other stuff, like a massive orgy that you cut out because it reads ridiculous. There's some things, once you put on a screen, it's like, there's one thing to wedgie and like abuse a kid. To carve a child,
that's a big part.
But it's not. It's in the book. He pulls out the knife in the miniseries, but I don't think he gets.
He doesn't do it.
Well, because in the miniseries they had ratings.
Well, and I will say in the miniseries, I liked Billy's hair better because he had that bitchin' like devil's lock that came like halfway down his face, as opposed to the standard '80s mullet in this one.
But I think that's what I'm getting at. That's what I mean by about faithful adaptations. It's good to be faithful to the idea and the feeling, but some things do not translate to a screen because when you watch something, you're watching the realism going, I don't believe that. Whereas the parents, the adults all being like these very vacant figures or ominous figures, I think that works. And it's interesting because the children have to face that first before they can face them. But there's just something about that. And it's probably because I've seen watching, what was that TV show with the suicide this year that was real popular with teens? Same thing. Like they're pitching these things where like if these were real, it'd be so much scarier. It's scarier to see real bullies than bullies that are doing things that seem seem just unlikely.
I had to break it to you, Elric, but maybe you should Google some news because there are bully kids doing stuff just as bad as that. As your, I mean, if you think they're overboard, that's pretty accurate.
Elric was really cool, so he never.
I just couldn't.
Or maybe it's because you grew up in New Zealand, but I can.
Yeah, we definitely didn't have the same kind of thing.
Y'all just don't have that.
Yeah, the kids that I grew up with got as far as scarring you with it. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
That shit. Yeah, that's pretty legit.
Dude, in this day and age when there are Facebook Live updates when you're watching a kid getting beaten to death.
Yeah.
I mean,
I know, but maybe it's because you never see another side to them, which I don't really buy. Like when I see only the bully side to the characters, I don't believe people walk around like that. I think
him
take
getting
advantage
beat by his dad is definitely a hand down from that.
But I guess they all seem like tropes to me. You know what I mean? It didn't seem like real beings. But, that's pretty minor.
It still gets our endorsement.
Go see it.
Everybody loved it.
I mean, it's probably one of the
Shockwave's approved.
It's going to be in my top 10 list for the year, I guarantee it.
Super
It's still amazing.
Have you guys seen anything from TIFF? Out of TIFF yet?
No. We don't get
How
to
does
go
that
to
happen?
I don't know.
What are the big ones?
Well, everybody's talking about Revenge, which is a rape revenge film that Shudder picked up. So Shudder should be announcing details on when they're releasing that. And I will say, I mean, like I think because it's a good endorsement. I watched a film called The Lodgers from the director of Let Us Pray.
I liked Let Us Pray a lot.
This is a complete flip of the coin to something a little bit more brooding and a little bit more classical, but more in the vein of the others. But it is a period piece about a brother and sister who live in a giant mansion all by themselves. But there is a them element that lives beneath the floorboards of their giant home. And these things come out at night, and they've got to make sure that they don't open the doors and try to avoid these things. But it touches on some very sensitive topics, and I actually went along for the ride. I thought the performances were really sound, the imagery was really cool. So yeah, we'll see where it lands.
Nice,
very cool. Elric, what do you got?
A little film about competitive marathon tickling.
Oh, my favorite doc.
Dude.
My God, I couldn't watch this thing.
Tickling is a horror film. And I'm just going to start that. Look, I'd heard that it was a New Zealand reporter who made
What's
it.
What's the name of it again?
It's called Tickled. And it's a documentary that starts off with this New Zealand journalist who stumbles across, and it's on, I saw it on HBO right now. So it's just, if you have HBO, you can just watch it anytime. And it just starts with a video where he's watching guys wearing Adidas suits, two young, attractive guys tickling each other, but like being strapped down so you can't stop the tickling. You keep laughing, and it's just super awkward. And the reporter's like, well, this is kind of quirky and funny, and he has a reputation of doing little pieces on these funny stories. So he starts doing a piece, and he gets like a kind of a cease and desist order by whoever owns the company of this marathon tickling. He's like, well, that's weird, like overkill to stop me. So he starts digging deeper, and it just goes in this direction where he basically traces it to a place in America where all these tickling videos, and then he starts finding out people who are in the tickling videos are then in their personal lives, when they don't want the tickling video up anymore, they are being humiliated in their personal lives. The person who's running this is basically going out of their way to make them look bad, threatening crazy legal action, and just opens this totally bizarre world that for most of it it's just this weird underground tickling fetish thing, which is just, it sounds funny and you're laughing for the first like 20 minutes, and then at a certain point you just stop laughing and go, what is this? And then it slowly looks behind the curtain to figure out, I'm not going to spoil this, to figure out who is like running this, why you would be doing this, and then it gets a lot more sinister. And it just is one of those things that leaves you very uneasy about the internet. It's in general. It's not even dark web. That's the crazy part. No. It's what you can do if you have money. If you have a lot of money, you can mess with people, and it's I found it actually pretty disturbing and an interesting doc. It was like totally left field.
It's a total onion peel. You just keep going deeper and deeper, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, he's standing outside the offices of these guys, and what are they doing in there? Because the cameraman can't actually physically walk into the building, but there's almost something horrifying about the framing of the documentarian's composition, because you're looking down this doorway into this guy's office, like a person who is perhaps responsible for the tickling videos, and all you just see is people in the background and a mattress, and you're like, oh god,
it feels sleazier than porn. Like somehow it does. Like I had a lot of problems watching this. Like it bothered me for some reason. Like I had problems watching the people be tickled because it's not even like funny tickling. Yeah. It's like torturous tickling.
Well, they call it marathon tickling and stuff. So because they're meant to do it for as long as they can. And so there's one scene, like imagine your nightmare being, you've got your arms bound and your legs bound, and then like 4 guys are on you tickling all the different parts of your body. And it's it's not meant to, I'm not going to say it's not meant to be sexual. Of course it is. But, they're not, it's not sex act sexual. So it's just super bizarre. Anyway, I totally don't recommend that for a lot of you. But for somebody I do. I don't know who you are.
It's fascinating, but it's intense. Don't go in being like, this is going to be
it's a lighthearted doc.
Yeah.
It's not.
Yeah.
And it's not even like, because when I heard that it was about like, these sinister websites and, the anonymity, I was like, oh, that sounds urban legendy. It's not. It's just everything
it makes your skin crawl.
Yeah, it really does.
That's the genuine feeling. I remember I saw it during Sundance during a buyer screening, and it was just me in this giant screening room, no one else. And I was just like feeling this, like it was really getting under my skin. And I was like, it was just more and more outlandish as it went on.
Mm-hmm.
Well, humans must just be super weird. Like, you think about all the possibilities of weird shit we could do as humans. The fact that there's some human behind the thing, you're like, what is wrong with people? Like,
I always say, if you think it, someone's really into it. Someone's into it.
If somebody can think it, somebody else wants to have sex with it.
Like I'm looking at Becca's mouse for her computer. I'm like,
Ryan wants to have sex with that.
Wow.
I was going to say, someone's really into this mouse.
Someone's really into the mouse.
So anyway, that's a weird one. And also
But where did you see Tickled?
Tickled was on HBO.
Oh,
so
HBO,
you can watch it. Anyone who's got HBO can watch it. Probably on Prime too.
It's also on iTunes.
And it actually was really well reviewed. It's one of those films that like people held in esteem. And I just wanted to thank our listener and strong filmmaker in his own right, David Sandberger, and his partner and Lotta last night came to my film school that I run.
Cool.
And we did like an hour and a half conversation about filmmaking. And it's super cool because at the start I played the lights out short and Lotta filmed from behind. And literally every single student, even if they'd say, they all jumped out of their seat. I was like,
awesome.
It's so fun when people can still play the fiddle, So it was super fun to see them. But David's really good at breaking down, the process of actually making stuff. And it was fun to see, connect with people.
That's cool.
Annabelle's still, to me, one of the best made movies this year. I just think the gags are so, to be honest, I felt the gags in that were better than the gags in it, but it's a better story.
Mm-hmm.
That was like the two, seeing the films back to back like that, I was like, oh, if you mix these a little more, but it's still good stuff.
Well, since you're talking about stuff on HBO, I'll continue with stuff on HBO. So I checked out The Deuce this week, which is the new TV show on HBO, which stars James...
Double Franco.
Yeah, James Franco.
Double Franco.
In 2 roles, which I will say was beginning a little confusing at the top because they don't explain that he's in 2 roles, and I did not know this going in. So I was like, that guy changes his clothes so
Did they both
fast.
have mustaches?
They do.
Oh, that's confusing.
So yeah, they both have the exact same facial hair and exact same haircut. They just kind of dress differently, and their mannerisms are slightly different, but even still, it's still just Franco. So I'm like, man, he's changing his pants like lightning. And
I would have thought that would have been an ego play, but I heard David say, so it's by the guy who did The Wire. I heard him talk on a show that it's actually based on twin brothers. So it's for real. Like, these are real characters.
So that was my first question was like, was this just
totally legit.
Franco going like, I like both characters.
No.
Can I do them both? But yeah, that actually makes sense now. So the show is not directly about horror yet, though I have a feeling that horror is definitely going to come into play. But what it is about is this kind of environment of 42nd Street, aka the Deuce. And it's set in 1971, and it's really about how the porn industry gets involved in 42nd Street, because at the top of the show, 42nd Street is already just this den of sin where it's just prostitutes and drugs. And it's weird looking at it. And I mean, I always kind of envisioned what 42nd Street would look like, but they're showing it and it's like prostitutes and drugs and, people getting blowjobs in telephone booths and some guy dying on the corner from an overdose. And then it pans up and there's a giant marquee for Bird with the Crystal Plumage. And I'm like, it just felt so juxtaposed for me. But I guess that at the time, that's where these films were kind of damned to be. Yeah. They did put 2
That's where Bill Lustig went to see Bird for the first time, as revealed on Killer Baby 50.
I will say that they did spell plumage wrong.
But that's probably true of the actual marquee.
I went back and looked.
I guarantee you, because
I went back and found a picture of the actual marquee, and it looks like they did it was one or the other. Like one version only has one M. I want to say in the actual film.
Hands down, the geekiest moment in the history of this podcast is the spelling mistakes on the marquee.
Okay, so here was my other geek moment. So one of the other moments in the show, because what you are seeing is a lot of the 42nd Street environment, and there's this other moment where it goes past a theater, and on the marquee it says, "From incredibly outrageous director John Waters comes Mondo Trash Show," and I was like, "That's his first film. They would not be billing him as a crazy outrageous director yet because it's literally his first film." So then I like breaking out my books and going back and being like, "Was he critically acclaimed as like an outrageous director after that one film?" I'm such a nerd, but yeah. So that was my other kind of.
He probably could have been.
I don't think that they would have listed the director on a marquee. I think it's more of like, this is the same guy who made The Wire. He spent a long time in Baltimore. That was probably like a big like wink at Waters.
The one cool thing I heard him say, David Simon, because this is the concern in the current like world, is this is a film largely about the exploitation of women, and he said it's all about following the money, how the porn industry became legitimized through actions of mafia and stuff, but he wants to follow the money to chart just like he did with The Wire. But he said he was really concerned doing it because he didn't want to make a show, basically a porn show, and he was really scared. So what he did is Maggie Gyllenhaal became a major producer on it, not just like a creative producer, and then he hired almost exclusively women to direct and write most of the episodes. So he said it changed radically once he did that because they were so involved creatively to figure out what's the best way to actually tell the story. And I thought that was kind of cool.
And they've actually, the show kind of goes out of its way. I mean, of course, there's going to be some women exploitive moments in it because there's a lot about, the prostitutes on 42nd Street and the ones who work with the pimp, which is Method Man, or versus the ones who kind of, I make money, it's my money, I keep my money. And then you've also got these waitresses who work at Franco's restaurant who he's forcing to make them wear leotards because he discovered that they get more tips that way. So there's a lot of it, but there's always another echo. So even if you're seeing these prostitutes, that are working with the pimps and being exploited, you then have Maggie's character who is very much about, taking control of her own business and sees it as a business. And yeah, so it's so far, I mean, I've only seen the first episode, but I really like it so
I'm really
far.
looking for that one. I think it'll be cool.
Be prepared for 2 Francos.
Double Frank.
The Deuce.
Yeah.
Rob G.
Yeah.
Kino Lorber just had yet another one of their sales, and I try to take advantage every time they do. So one of the pictures I picked up from them on Blu-ray is Deranged, which is from 1974, and it's basically the first... I think it's the first Ed Gein movie, or at least one that's straightly based on Ed Gein, like not an exaggeration like what Psycho and Texas Chainsaw was. And it's funny because this was always on a double feature DVD with Motel Hell, which I've always owned, and I've never been able to make it through this movie. It's just like the beginning of it is it's a little on the boring and slow side, but I got the Blu-ray on the sale, and I watched the whole movie, and I still don't 100% like it, but I do appreciate it a bit more. And part of it is because this is Bob Clark roughly around the Black Christmas period, and Alan Ormsby, who was in Children Shouldn't Play with Dead Things. So it's kind of like that whole crew of Ormsby and Bob Clark. And the one, what's the woman's name? The woman that looks after the girls in Black Christmas that's always drinking the booze.
I know exactly.
She's got a role in it. So I'm like, oh, okay. She pops up and it's kind of like has a crush on this Ezra character, which is supposed to be Ed or whatever. And so there's enough ties to the early days of those guys, so I'm always curious when you see, it's like watching Dark Star because of Dan O'Bannon and John Carpenter. I don't necessarily love that movie, but it's interesting to watch where they started.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And so Deranged is that for this crew of people. And I mean, I think again, it was a slog, but then kind of towards the second half, there's a couple of pretty genuinely creepy, weird moments. Like there's one, they very loosely take the idea of, in the real life, Ed Gein had lured a bartender back who ended up becoming one of his victims. So there's a bartender character there. And there's one in particular scene where basically she comes in and finds like the den of bodies and stuff. And among them, like, cause it looks like it's just a bunch of corpses in a room, but then you realize one of them is Ed wearing a mask, like the skin mask. And it's genuinely creepy. I was like, all right, well, that's a good moment right there. And then, and then the third act, it gets pretty suspenseful because he's actually after a victim. But I still don't think it's a very good movie. But again, it's just interesting because of who it is. And part of it is I honestly think, I've read books on Ed Gein and the case and everything, and there's interesting facets of the case because of how bizarre it is. But I just don't think that the Ed Gein story makes for a compelling movie.
It's not very interesting.
There's nothing about the Ed Gein story that's like, oh, that would be a great movie. And so that's why, because I've seen the one with Railsback, and I think Kane Hodder did one. And
Railsback's performance is good, but there's still nothing.
But that movie's
story
not.
Engine,
there's nothing about that story that is interesting cinematically. And so I think that's the fault of it. Is it's the source material is what it's based on is not really anything that would make an interesting movie.
A stack of scenes.
Yeah, it's only better.
Of scenes of just watching this killer and watching this.
Yeah, he didn't have a climax to his story. Just a lot of bad shit.
Yeah, which is why, something like Texas Chainsaw that kind of just takes the element of it and twists it becomes a cinematic movie. So, but again, if you love Bob Clark and Children Shouldn't Play with Dead Things and want to see something kind of from that era where these guys are still figuring out their filmmaking craft, I think it's interesting to watch at least once.
Well, in that vein, I'm about to wrap up Chainsaw Confidential, the Gunnar Hansen book.
Great book.
I have not read it. I was a little late to the story on that one, but I had heard a lot of the stories pieced together on how Texas Chainsaw was made, obviously, but to hear it through Gunnar's eyes or his voice is cool. It's a little dry at times. I will admit it's a little dry at times, but hearing stories about how, where the house they shot in was next to a pot crop and, how that influenced the crew and, all of the stories, even his perspective on why a lot of people got jilted on making any money on Texas Chainsaw was really interesting because there's a great Texas Chainsaw Massacre making of book that I think has a slightly skewed in a different way. But I wanted to read it in the wake of Toby's death, and I think it's very fascinating. If it's kind of essential reading if you're a giant fan of the franchise in general, just to kind of hear from Gunnar.
Yeah, no, that's a great book. I picked it up when we were at Texas Frightmare a couple years ago, and I just practicly devoured almost all of it on the plane.
Yeah, I mean,
really good fast read.
It's funny. It is a fast read. The funny thing is too is that. You kind of go in, I had always heard growing up, it was like, oh my God, everybody went mad on the set and everybody was a little kooky and it was so hot and it smelled awful and da-da-da-da. And those elements kind of play into it, but at the end of the day, it's still filmmaking. Mm-hmm. So there's kind of that, I don't know, just again, that kind of dry process. It was like, well, here's what happened when Toby didn't understand how to do this. And I was like, oh, okay, Toby sounded a little unprepared, or, the day that the stuff that I really kind of sparked to was, how he sawed his leg, putting a piece of sheet metal on his leg and then throwing a stake on it and then throwing, a blood pack and then still getting injured because the chain of the chainsaw heated up the sheet metal so much it burned his leg. Okay, that's the good stuff. That's the good stuff. Yeah. So there are a lot of good stories like that. It's a good read. I'm kind of having a blast with audible.com, guys. So that I picked that up and I've got the book as well. So in between, I kind of listen and then read and then listen.
Yeah, that's a fun way to do it.
I've been considering it because I spend so much time on the subway now. I'm like, I could just listen to the book now.
Speaking of listening, essential listening on that topic is Mick Garris's new Postmortem. Yep. It's actually, it is the best tribute I've heard so far. And the best thing about it, besides all the love they give to Toby, is actually the last hour is the replay of his old, what was
I think it was the FearNet.
Yeah, FearNet interview with Toby. But he even addresses things he's like, it must have been a hard shoot. And Toby's, everyone hated me. I mean, it was just I think when you have a vision, the same thing with Blade Runner, where you push people so hard because you're trying to achieve that thing and the conditions are freaking terrible. He's like, it's just the worst conditions, but you had to do it. And it's really interesting him talking about the humor. And I'd never heard this term before, which I really liked, called red humor. So when humor is so black that it's red. And Mick was the one who kind of uses this term, and then it kind of sifts throughout this whole interview. They keep talking about the red humor, and he talks about how, as we all know now, that no one thought it was funny at the time. And he said it took about 5 years before anyone saw any of the humor, especially with Jim Sedow's line, look what you've done to the door. Yeah. Look what you broke inside the door. But you realize that term, first time I've ever heard it, I'll probably be using it for the rest of my life now for super dark. Like Killer Joe is probably red humor, There's those movies that are just so dark and Texan. But it's a really good listen. for where you're probably at right now. And also, you will hear Mick Garris's viewpoint on the Poltergeist story, which is fascinatingly different than what you would have heard on ours. It's worth your listen. That's
Getting all sides.
Yeah, all
as
sides.
you might say.
Yeah.
Anything else from anybody?
Yeah, I watched a couple of different things this week. So I will say I caught up on American Horror Story Cult.
Oh, yes, I did too.
2 episodes
Just the first one, or
just the first one?
Okay, I've only one still.
I watched that.
Yeah.
What do you guys think of the first one?
You know, I enjoyed it. I still have no freaking clue where it's
case
going.
with every American Horror Story.
Yeah, I know. I will.
Episode 1, you're like, yeah, it's kind of cool. Let's see where it goes.
For the past 2 seasons, Freak Show and the one last year, Roanoke Nightmare, I made it about 4 episodes in going, I can't wait to see where this goes. And when it actually goes there, I was like, this is stupid. And then I stopped watching. So I'm really hoping that Cult kind of continues this, because right now, that first episode, like you were telling me about the Cheetos on the face, and I was like, this sounds
Was I wrong? No.
You were, I left going, that sounds so outlandish. You can't do that. And then they did it.
They did it, but the funny thing is it's preceded by him dry humping the television.
Yeah, he's so
when
excited
Trump
about
wins,
it.
he's like fucking his television. And I was like, oh my God, this probably really happened.
Yeah, and I'm left, and I think, you know, and from the way that I was picturing it in my head, I was like, oh my God, that sounds like this is so left wing, like they're going to alienate viewers. But what's weird is I think that they actually did a good job of kind of going straight down the middle with portraying both sides as bad, because he's clearly kind of nutty. She's portrayed as like the snowflake liberal, where she's got like,
but which is worse, the violent, awful human on the
Cheeto
street?
no. I definitely agree that was
Doesn't he call her the C word on the street? Like, that's crazy. That's crazy.
But I think that there, you know, it was surprisingly somewhat level, where I was expecting it to be very one-sided, but they definitely kind of try to make her look snowflakey, like everything bothers her too.
Sure. I think what was really refreshing is getting Billy Lord in there. Yeah. You know, she came over from Scream Queens, and I think it was just nice to see some fresh faces now populating the cast. I'm sure a lot of the OG.
It's hard to predict where it will go. Like, I found like this episode is like, oh, I don't know. Is it going to be this clown thing? Is it going to be, you know, I'm just curious. So this one I'll definitely do at least the first couple, you know, to see where it goes.
I'm not as into the clowns yet, but maybe it's just, I've never found clowns
And
scary.
it's also
Pennywise.
the timing. It's too close.
Those clowns are kind of cool. I mean, like, I'm not a big
penis face clown.
Yeah, the penis face. I actually thought I'm not one of the. There are 2 things that I fucking detest when it comes to haunted houses: clowns and aliens. And anybody, anytime does like this kind of Area 51.
Yeah, who cares?
Let's make our maze a giant alien thing. I don't care.
Yeah.
Same with clowns. But in this instance, and as well as it, I actually thought the clowns worked when she was like walking by the grocery store, and you know, clowns are getting it on.
The grocery store scene was pretty terrifying.
Yeah, exactly.
So.
Well, what was terrifying is that she walks into the grocery store, and the guy is like, the clerk is like, "This is crazy, huh?" And she's like, "I can't believe he won." And then the guy puts on a "Make America Great Again."
Do you know who that
hat.
was? The person who put on that hat? That is Sonny and Cher's son.
Oh, my
really?
God. I didn't know that.
I had no idea.
Anyways, I'm intrigued.
yeah.
I'm probably going to, by the time this episode airs, I'm going to catch up to 2.
Yeah, I got 2. It was on last night, so it should be sitting on my DVR right now.
I'm going to try to catch up, but a fun tidbit about episode 2, which I already saw mentioned, and it was funny because I saw people talking about, like, was that what I think it was? Yes. Which is Sarah Paulson's house. And they're like, is that Tommy Doyle's house from the original Halloween?
Are you serious?
It is. It totally is. The house is from the original Halloween.
And that's why originally there was a news story about Halloween had been shooting. That's
cut to several months ago. I'm waking up on a Saturday morning and I'm Bloody Disgusting.
That's what they thought.
I see Bloody Disgusting announced that we've already started Halloween and we're shooting at the Doyle house and and that made my life a fucking living hell for 5 hours.
Damn you!
While I had
Story.
to dig into what it was, and then someone texted me. It was like, "Bro, we're shooting an American Horror Story." I'm like, "Excellent, thank you." Email blast to everybody. Everything's good.
Wow. But that's cool. Cool little tidbit. I love little
Well, they use both
like
houses.
That.
The one, the Doyle house and the one across the street.
Yeah.
Lindsay's.
There's all that stunt casting going on, obviously, about it too. But the one I did like is the idea of Jordan Peele being in it.
Oh, really?
I was like, oh, Jordan Peele playing the old, or is it George who has to kill the animals at the start?
Oh, no, Mike.
I was like, Jordan Peele, that'd be kind of fun, like seeing him act in one. Yeah.
Well, all the kids have picked their adults. Like there was an interview on Comic-Con where they all picked who they thought should be their adults, and they were all pretty spot on.
I don't see any world where Jessica Chastain isn't, because she was a Mama. I mean, she's the star of Mama. She's worked with the director. It's a redhead. It's like
she's going to be there.
Seems like a sure thing, you know.
Sure.
But we'll see.
Yeah. So I also watched PSYCHOVILLE, which had been recommended by a lot of our listeners who knew that I was really into Inside Number 9. And this was the two guys who created Inside Number 9, Reese Shearsmith and Steve Pemberson. This was their show beforehand. And I will say this is way more over the top. Where Inside Number 9, it's still horror, but it almost feels kind of Hitchcock classy at times. This is clearly supposed to be a horror comedy, and it feels it's really coarse and somewhat sophomoric, and there's a lot of like really gross humor and body humor in it, and not like gore humor, much more like body humor. It's a lot of like young people playing old people, but really over the top with a lot of moles, like gross stuff. But that said, the core of it is actually really good, and I'm really enjoying it. It is just this mix of weird people. One is a little person actor. There's an old man who is really, really wealthy, and you don't know why he's so wealthy. He's really mysterious in a mansion. Then you find out he owns like all of the Beanie Babies, and he's made a fortune off Beanie Babies, which is great because his assistant, who is now helping him procure more Beanie Babies, is Daniel Kaluuya. Thank you. Is in this, and he's hilarious in it. One of the best scenes, it is the most tense scene, is this guy with Daniel competing on an eBay auction for an alligator against these two other people, and the way that they shoot it, it is the most tense moment ever. But ultimately, all of these different people all receive a letter one day that just says, "I know what you did." And then, some of the people are like, "Oh gosh, somebody knows." And then others are like, "I don't even know what I did. What is this? It's meaningless." And then a couple of days later, they get videotapes, but none of them still have VCR. So then you see the killer come back with like DVDs. It's great. Fun. But it's all leading up to that they are all connected to this one death in some way, and that somebody is now stalking them for it. And it's really fun. And so be prepared for it to be a bit more sophomoric. But it is on Amazon now through this thing called the BritBox, which I've been enjoying because it's also got like Are You Being Served in Faulty Towers on there. PSYCHOVILLE.
Since you're on a Reese Shearsmith kick, you should check out The Cottage from 2008.
I love that movie and had no idea that's him.
He's in it,
gosh.
Along with Andy Serkis, but it's about a botched kidnapping while there's a killer running around. A little bit like slasher, a little survival horror, but it's pretty good. Yeah.
And then I watched one more that I'll throw in if no one else has anything else.
Nope.
Okay. I watched Dr. Black, Mr. Hyde from 1976, which was given to me by Paula Hayfie at the last trivia night. She was like, "I know you really liked Petey Wheatstraw and Sugar Hill." And she was like, "You need to watch this one." And it's from 1976. It is directed by the same guy who directed Blackula, but it feels distinctly less classy than Blackula does, whereas Blackula I would say is a really good movie. This one feels a lot more like exploitation. It does have a really cool soundtrack. Like the opening song is absolutely amazing. It stars Bernie Casey, who everyone will remember as the head of the Lambda like coalition from Revenge of the Nerds.
And exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, and he plays like this crazy like badass jivey doctor in this one, who is studying liver cells and discovers how to regenerate dead liver cells. But when he uses the drug on himself, it turns him into a vampire who decides to feed on prostitutes.
Oh.
Like you do.
Pretty good.
Yeah. And so it still has that Jekyll and Hyde thing. Again, it feels distinctly more exploitive, just because like in the opening scene, he's in like his medical practice and he sees one guy who's there and he's like, "My knee hurts, doc." And then he goes to the next one and it's a fully naked woman and you don't even know why she's there. She's just in there for a checkup and she's completely naked, just sitting there like, "What up, doc?" And then she starts talking about how she's a prostitute and it's just like, this just went downhill.
That sounded good.
It's good.
That was the high point. All right.
So it's still fun in a very exploitation manner. But yeah, it's a film. So, yeah, not my fave of the exploitation or blaxploitation pair. But yeah, if you're into either, you really shouldn't miss Dr. Black, Mr. Hyde.
And how did you get it? Was a DVD that
Paula gave me a copy. So I'm not too sure what the availability is on that one.
Okay.
It actually resides as Slashback Video.
Does it?
There's a copy. Well, not that you could take it out or anything, but you could admire its cover.
But apparently it was released to VHS at some point.
Yeah.
So.
All right.
Excellent.
The last thing I want to mention, and I'll talk really quickly about it because it's basically, I've been talking about my collection to a lot of people, and one of the fun things about having a library, whether it be a book library or a video library, is that you don't see everything in there. Like everyone's like, you haven't seen all your movies? I'm like, no, that's the point of a library, is I want to be able to go over there and pick out something I've never seen before and appreciate it. I keep forgetting that Scream Factory has put out 3 full volumes of Vincent Price collections.
Yes.
That's a whole lot of Vincent Price out there. And, he's done so many films. I haven't seen them all. And so late last night, I was like, you know what? I'm in the mood to I'm just going to watch a Vincent Price classic that I've never watched before. And so I popped on The Last Man on Earth, which is technically the first adaptation of I Am Legend. And then the subsequent version that came out was The Omega Man. And then, of course, the Will Smith I Am Legend. But this is the first.
And there's an Asylum one.
Of course.
I was Legend or something like that. But yes, continue.
I love that so much. Oh, I Am Omega.
I Am Omega. Thank you.
That was awesome.
I might be a legend.
I might be a legend. But this was a really fascinating, interesting movie because of it's like, because it's 1964. And again, this is the story that inspired George Romero, which will lead into our tribute to do Night of the Living Dead. But like Night of the Living Dead's version is what ended up becoming zombies. I think George referred to them as ghouls. The word zombie never came up. And so in the story and in this movie, in The Last Man on Earth, they're vampires. But they're not, it's funny because they're not the traditional sense of vampire that I think of in a horror movie, especially of this time period. I think Dracula or, somebody with fangs. Most of them are still lucid and kind of like, there's one that used to be his like lab assistant that's constantly pounding on his door like, we're going to come get you and stuff. And so I thought this was a really cool little movie. It felt like a feature-length Twilight Zone. And I'll watch anything with Vincent Price, quite frankly. And I just thought this was a great little movie. And he's one of those actors that did so much great genre work that it's almost like a treat every time you pull out another one of his movies. There's something there in every single one of them. Yeah. So I strongly recommend The Last Man on Earth. And I mean, I don't know. I know one of these collections went out of print. It might be the first one. But I would look into which ones are still available because it's just cool that these all exist on Blu-ray.
If I recall, what I appreciate about the I Am Legend adaptations is the quiet moments with our main character, Neville. Each interpretation has a different way of showing us the character, our way into those characters, And I think I forgot with Vincent Price what he does. Does he play chess or is that the Charlton Heston one?
That might be the Heston one.
Yeah,
because he's not.
But he's got it. But he's
himself.
Yeah, Heston goes. But in Vincent Price, I remember he had his own daily routine. Whereas the Will Smith version, he's got his own routine. I know that's part of the story, but how it's constantly contemporized,
Yeah, it's a little different in each one.
It's a little different in each one. And what I love about it, too, is that I Am Legend, much like Invasion of the Body Snatchers, is one of those things that I don't mind if you keep updating it. Keep giving me new adaptations of it. Let a decade or two pass, but let it mean something.
And it's very performance-based. It depends who that actor is. It will be a totally different movie.
Yeah, exactly.
And listen, I Am Legend has its flaws, but I thought Will Smith did a really good job at it.
It's still a really compelling story. And the one thing that I thought that I Am Legend was really trying to do, because it is like a big blockbuster studio film, was they wanted to focus more on like the scope, like let's show how all of society is being evacuated and turned into these monsters and everything. Whereas the other ones were all about being inside the enclosed space and feeling what's going on out there.
Yeah, the one thing no one's done is make it really, really scary.
Like
make the real horror version of the story would be interesting.
Well, there's some good.
They all have good moments.
Yeah, they all have some good moments. Just imagine Arnold Schwarzenegger, because Schwarzenegger was going to be in a giant adaptation of that.
Yeah,
I would have guffawed a couple of years ago, but after seeing Maggie, he seems like he's interested in doing some smaller, more sensitive roles. I think it would have been a lot more kind of like bicep pumping, ass kicking, had Schwarzenegger done it.
Yeah.
But.
I'll wait another 20 years for Gyllenhaal. I'll watch that movie. Gyllenhaal with a mustache.
Yeah.
Good call.
All righty. All right, well, let's take a little break, and then we will reconvene to honor Mr. George Romero.
Yeah, let's do it.
Today's episode of Shockwaves is brought to you by Shudder.
Brought to you by AMC Network, Shudder is not only a premium streaming video service, but an experience unlike any other. Created for fans of all degrees of thrillers, suspense, and horror, Shudder is the home to the largest and fastest growing human-curated selection of high-quality, spine-tingling, and provocative films, TV series, and originals. And there's always something new and unexpected for Shudder members to explore.
New to Shudder is Neil Gaiman's Likely Stories, adapted from the dark tales of author Neil Gaiman. This collection of distinct, odd, and brilliant short stories is both cinematic and strange. In each film, each character is compelled to share their story, and we're drawn into their very act of telling tall tales. While each episode has its own lead character, they are backed by an ensemble cast that play across all 4 bold and original films. If you enjoyed American Gods, Coraline, or Stardust, you'll love Neil Gaiman's Likely Stories.
Shudder is available for $4.99 a month or $49.99 with an annual membership. But our listeners can get the free month by entering promo code SHOCK at checkout. That is, entering SHOCK at checkout will get you a free month of Shudder.
Go to Shudder.com today and find the best collection of thrillers, suspense, and horror available to stream anywhere.
Man, we got this by the ass.
Well, that is our respectful start to the George Romero tribute.
Well, Elric's version of respect.
No, we quote one of the great films of George Romero, Dawn of the Dead, by, obviously choosing a really great line that Elric loves to quote. No, it's been a while since George's passing, and I know a lot of you out there have been, wanting us to weigh in on it and talk about his oeuvre and kind of, I don't know, I mean, like the best way I feel to kind of tackle this thing is, where were we the first time we saw a Romero film? Mm-hmm. What are our favorite Romero films? What made him one of the masters of horror? What made him stand out amongst the masters of horror? Because I feel like, among Toby and Wes and John and Don Coscarelli and George Romero, they all had something to say, and they all did it in different ways,
We should start with what Quentin Tarantino said about him when he gave him the award at the, whatever the horror awards were about, 2009. I was reading it, and he said, George A. Romero, people don't all know what the A stands for, but it stands for a fucking genius. And I like that because, I mean, he look, I call him blue-collar intellectual.
Yeah.
Because his film, he's always making the films of blue collar workers, but man, it always has like brains and everything he does, and an idea at the heart of whatever he made. And I view him as just probably the most important of horror filmmakers for me. It's huge.
Yeah, I mean, hearing about his passing was definitely a shock. I mean, it's just one of those weird things now where we're at that age where we're gonna start losing
old.
These people. Yeah, it sucks. But you never, for some strange reason, it's like you don't think it's possible for us to lose these heroes, guys.
Especially a guy like him, he's always smiling and seems like anytime you'd see him, even if you didn't really talk to him, if you'd see him at one of these passing events that he would be frequenting, he always just has this big smile and just seems so alive. Yeah. It's just one of those characters.
Even after he started having some medical problems a couple of years ago, I still remember seeing him at conventions and being like, oh, is Romero okay now? I know he'd had like that thing. And he always seemed fine.
Yeah. He was at, not the last Texas Frightmare we were at together, but 2 years ago, he was there.
He was there.
I remember that.
Doing photo ops with Bub. They put Howard Sherman in the makeup again and stuff. So it's a weird loss.
Yeah, every time I saw him, he always seemed contemplative and quiet, always just, I think the last time I had seen him was Sundance. I think Diary of the Dead was the last time I had any interaction with him.
You didn't come to that Land of the Dead screening at the Egyptian where he came?
No,
okay.
no.
For the soundtrack,
yeah. But Oh, wait, were you talking about Day of the Dead?
Yeah, Day.
Oh, yeah,
it
was that Day
remember?
of the Dead?
Yeah,
That's
and he was there
right.
signing.
That's
That's the only time I met him. I went up and got in line, shook his hand.
I forgot about that.
That was, now that we've met and interviewed most of our heroes, we're lucky enough with the show and stuff like that. He's not someone we ever got to do that. So that for me was one of the only people who's I only got to shake their hand and say what their work meant. For me, and you know this because we've been doing a show for, and Bekah knows this, but like my first horror film, I mean, that's, I am not sitting in the seat without the moment of being 5 years old and somebody making me watch Creepshow and really fucking up my childhood in a sense. But that is so huge. I can't think of anything else more important than that moment in my life.
Yeah.
For who I became. Yeah. And more than a gateway, like the negative gateway for a while,
Right.
But it becomes this thing you then look back fondly. So I did tell him, I said, yeah, you're the first one who really fucked me up, man. And he went, oh, well, I guess that's great. He's like, which is kind of cool, it's crazy.
So what was everyone else's first? Your first was Creepshow, but then when did you come back to Romero?
Probably a lot longer. I think it was the when I'm like 16 or so. I think it was I think I've told this before. The colorized version of Night of the Living Dead. I saw before I saw it black and white.
Oh wow!
And I remember always going, "Whoa, what is this color?" Like it made the zombies look so bizarre. They had like the green skin, but I still knew it was a great movie.
Yeah.
And then I think I saw Savini's. The Night of the Living Dead, and then I saw the black and white.
And
so
then you saw the original.
But once you get to Dawn. Once you wash up on Dawn, you're like, okay, total genius. That's the movie, I think, that really changes how you view who that person was, at least in my case at the time.
Mine, I had seen The Crazies when I was younger, but it didn't really do much for me. Like it was a perfectly fine film, but when I watched it as a kid, it didn't do as much for me. I'd seen Creepshow as a kid, which I thought was outrageously funny, but the one that really affected me, and I may have told this story on Killer POV, came at a very specific time. I was 16 years old, junior in high school, and I got chickenpox. And everyone else in the world gets chickenpox when they're like 6 years old and in first or second grade. The longer you wait, the worse chickenpox get. And I was actually hospitalized. I was out of school for like 2 weeks for chickenpox. Like seriously, I had them under my eyelids.
You were that kid.
I was that. Like it was bad. I had them in my throat. Like that's why they had to hospitalize
This is pre-Mistress
me.
Bekah. Don't get those two images mixed up in your head.
You were that kid that I was like, put this kid in quarantine.
Yeah, like it was bad. Like you don't realize like how bad it is if you wait. So like I got them my junior year of high school and it was awful. And I was out of school for 2 weeks. I was in the hospital for like 24 hours. But then the next 2 weeks, literally all I could do was lay in bed covered in like calamine lotion and watch movies. And so every day my mom would bring home a new stack of movies. And she, was just trying to find stuff.
Did you have homework?
Some, but not that much. I mean, yeah. So I read a lot, but so every day she would bring me home another stack of movies to watch. And during that time, I remember this time so well because it was the first time I saw Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It was the first time I saw the Rocky Horror Picture Show, and it was the first time I saw Night of the Living Dead. And subsequently I sent her back the next day with the order for more zombies, and then she brought me Day and Dawn as well. And so within that solid week, I saw both Day and Dawn, but Night of the Living Dead was the one that affected me the most because at that time, as 16-year-old, I had not watched a lot of black and white horror. Like I tended to push away from those. And when I was stuck in quarantine with literally nothing else to watch except The Price is Right and then whatever movies my mom happened to bring me that day, I watched it and it terrified me because the black and white aesthetic was so much more frightening than any of the other stuff I was watching. And the ambiguity and how kind of grainy and muddy it looks, it just really terrified me. And even though that I now watch it and I'm like, there's some shocking scenes, like the kid in the basement's obviously scary. I don't think it would scare me as much if I saw it now than seeing it at that time when I was not accustomed to seeing black and white and was not accustomed to kind of that, there's really no explanation of why that shit's going on. They're like, it could be a radiation storm. And that's like all you get. It's just like people go crazy and start killing and eating each other. Could be a radiation storm, but it just focuses on the farmhouse. Like it really never feels the need to leave the farmhouse. And that was terrifying for me.
And how sad is it how topical it still feels? It bums me out.
God.
Oh my
how
gosh,
when I'm watching the Charlottesville stuff and I'm just thinking of that movie and I'm going,
Yeah.
oh,
50 years later.
50
and it's
years
like,
and this
wow.
is still relevant. Like, that's painful, you know?
It is, yeah.
But it's such a smart movie. It's just one of the smartest horror films ever made. Just the ending's prophetic, you know?
Yeah.
What about you, Ron? You remember your entryway into Romero?
Yeah, I'm like Elric. Creepshow was it. I remember I was homesick. And In Excess was playing that night, and it was really bad that I couldn't go see In Excess. Not that I had tickets, but
Wow.
But I remember, I think it was in middle school, and my dad had taped Creepshow off of HBO the previous night, and he was like, "Listen, I'm going to stay home too since you're sick. Hang out." And we popped in Creepshow, and I just remember the kind of roller coaster of emotions that I felt watching it, because it was like, oh, the way into this is by a comic book. Okay, that's a world I know. I was such a comic book kid growing up. I was like, fantastic, great entry point. And then the kind of first EC style story of, a father coming back from the dead. And I was like, oh, that's crazy. It's just zombies. That's gnarly. And I was like, okay, cool. I'm not really scared by this. And then it was, what was the follow-up story? I'm blanking. Oh, Jordy Verrill. And I was like, oh, okay, horror can be really funny too. And it's Stephen King. So I was reading
That one weirded me out as a kid. Like, I didn't know what it was.
Well,
like,
you know what it was? I was trying to figure out I was trying to process what the imagination, Jordy Verrill's imagination process.
Right.
I was trying to figure out, like, from a pure filmmaking angle, I was like, what is he doing right now? Is he really there? Is this really happening? I was like, oh, no. He's just imagining the potential possibilities of what was going on. So I think, as a youngster, I was like already trying to break down the storytelling of it all. And then the crate scared the shit out of me.
Oh my gosh,
That's the
crate scared the living hell out of me, because the blood, I think it was the blood of the student who is it the student? Yeah, it's the student, because he's like up against the crate and then the blood starts to seep. Getting this wrong. It's the janitor.
The janitor.
It's the custodian, because the custodian's arm is hanging up into the crate.
Right.
And then the blood starts to drizzle down, but it's not pure red. It's like a kind of a dark, fluidy, color. And I was like, oh my God, it is blood. And I flipped the hell out. And then the other kind of stories kind of fell into place, and I was like, okay, the cockroach one is fun, and the Ted Danson one, I was like, okay, this is kind of cool too. But it was a repeat of the first story, where somebody was coming back from the dead. But that was kind of my first entryway into Romero. And then it was at that point my father was like, okay, now time for the Dead trilogy, and Image had come out with the Night of the Living Dead Laserdisc, and I saw that, and then everything else kind of fell into place, and I watched those films, and then Martin, Night Riders, Season of the Witch. These were all discoveries that I made on my own. Later on when I was in college and I was starting to go back through his library.
Speaking of which, before I forget, I did hear a couple days ago that Romero was meant to do a 10-episode version of It originally.
Yep.
Really?
And he quit once they shortened it to 4 hours. That's why he left the project.
Oh, wow.
He was meant to do the 10-part TV. I mean, thinking about that, my brain was like, oh my God, Romero. Because his tone is so much more real.
Well, there's a lot of Romero could have been. Yeah, there was a lot of stuff they were going to do together. Yeah. For me, it's really hard to pinpoint exactly, but I think when I knew he had to be around 85, because that's when Day of the Dead came out. Mm-hmm. And at that point, the thing that really blew the doors open for horror was Michael Jackson's Thriller. And that was kind of my first introduction into I loved werewolves, and that one scared the crap out of me. And then I got a little taste of American Werewolf in London, but really it's the zombies. And I'll never forget, it was Thriller, and then catching on cable Return of the Living Dead, because my grandparents lived down the block from me, and their backyard was connected to a cemetery. So I would be freaked out when I slept there, because just like in both the video and the movie, it's kind of foggy back there, and you're seeing the fog go through the tombstones and stuff. But I think I want to believe that I saw Day of the Dead, but what I remember is them talking about George at the beginning of Return of the Living Dead.
Mm-hmm.
You ever heard of that movie, Night of the Living Dead? He's like, that was real. It's based on a true case, but they said they'd sue the shit out of that guy. And I remember thinking, like, oh my God, what's this movie they're referencing in this movie? I have to go see that true story, apparently. But then I remember, at this point, I was like just going to the video store and renting anything I could. And I mean, Day of the Dead just blew me away. I can't explain what it was about it. Obviously the gore, because, when you're a kid and you're getting into, you're a gore hound and you're like, oh my God, look at how amazing these effects are.
That is the movie when you say gore hound. That is one of those films.
That is the epitome of that, yeah.
That was too much. The first time I saw it was too much for me because I had loved Dawn, and when I saw Day, I was like, oh God, it's the nihilism of, say, the bad guys.
Right.
That was too much. And that's the one of all his films that now, as an older person, I realize is one of his best movies.
Oh, yeah.
But when I was young, it just felt like so intense to me.
Yeah, and I think I went backwards from Day on, because then I remember much later seeing Dawn with a couple of my high school buddies, and we used to play Dawn of the Dead, which was, long before video games. You'd upturn the couches and you'd pretend you're trapped in a mall, like shooting zombies. That was like our game. We're like, oh, we're Dawn of the Dead.
Some of us play Hot Lava. Rob played Zombie Attack in Mall.
I'm telling you, I'm sure a lot of kids did, especially because of Dawn of the Dead. And then eventually you get to Night, and it's just like, kind of like what I think part of it being in black and white just kind of it makes you feel like it's got this other quality to it. And yeah, the zombies are in it. They're not nearly as scary or gory as what I'd seen in other movies, but it felt like I was watching a great drama like 12 Angry Men.
Yeah.
Where the real story is this conflict between people. And as a young person, you're thinking to yourself, like, why can't people just get along? I don't understand it. And I just remember I was super sensitive. I was like devastated by the end of Night. First of all, it's probably the first time I was conscious of a black actor being the lead of a movie, which even at that point wasn't the norm for regular Hollywood movies. So I was like, oh, that's pretty interesting. And sadly still isn't. Yeah. But like the fate of, I have to assume everyone's seen Night of the Living Dead. The fate of Ben was one of the things that really horrified me and made me feel at ease. And of course, the way it's presented over the end credits. And that's when you're just like, holy shit, like movies really can do something to you. Yeah. And they can actually affect the way you feel and be like, God, I wish we could be better people. Like, we have to be better than this, right? So that was kind of going backwards, was my introduction into Romero's world. And then a couple years later, the thing I love is that comedies made these guys out to be larger than life. And what I mean by that is the next thing I remember was Morgan Stewart's Coming Home, the John Cryer comedy from 1987, which has this amazing scene where he's at the mall, or it's Christmas time, he's at the mall, he meets the girl of his dreams while waiting in line to get George Romero's autograph.
And this is supposed to be in Washington, D.C., and everybody comes dressed up, and there's like a line through the whole mall. He's a celebrity.
It's amazing. He happens to be at the mall, and then they just announce, ladies and gentlemen, signing at Walden Books, George A. Romero, the zombies that ate Pittsburgh. I was like, what? There he is. Oh my God.
Yeah.
And there's the book. Now the hilarious thing is it's not George at all. You see a guy from the background. You see the back of his head, but they didn't actually get George to do it. But still, the idea of it, and for many years I joked on my MySpace page and everything, I was like, I just want to meet a girl online while waiting to get George Romero's autograph. Just like in Morgan Stewart's Coming Home.
That's funny.
And at the same time, 1987 was also summer school, and of course those lunatics kept talking about the Tobey Hooper classic.
Yes.
And so I just love that we were at that key period where all these guys were were a part of pop culture.
Yeah. Well, what I appreciated about George was the fact that he bridged two very cool worlds, Italian horror and American horror. I can't think of any of the other masters of horror who at that time had bridged those two worlds, and through Argento and Dawn of the Dead, obviously as, young Splatter fans and Fangoria readers, we all knew about it, but somehow he was a great bridge, and made me more hyper aware of what Argento was doing, because I would watch Dawn of the Dead and I was like, wait a minute, I've heard of this guy and I've read about him in Fangoria, but if he's aligned with George, then that's the seal of approval I need. If George is
Two Evil Eyes comes out later.
Two Evil Eyes comes out. Exactly.
Romero is also credited as the one who gave us what we consider to be the modern day zombie, because we'd obviously had people rising from the dead, eating people. And we've got that, that goes back in all cultures, back to the dawn of man. There's been stories about corpses rising from the dead and eating people, vampires. vampires. But they were always called vampires, ghouls, or some other variation on that. And then zombie had always been reserved to people in Haitian and voodoo cultures who have had their souls taken away and are now just like walking shells. And he was the first one to apply the zombie name to the dead, reanimated ghouls eating people and kind of merge the two. And it really did kind of become what we know as the zombie and zombie culture.
Yeah, I mean, he invented the zombie, although he didn't invent the term zombie.
Yeah.
Like, he called them ghouls. I can't remember where it was first referred to as a zombie, but
the term zombie, the term zombie goes back to like literally the 1800s is the first time it's used, and it's used in African folklore. And then it was like Seabrook's book from the 1900s. Is where it really gets kind of teased out. And then, of course, we've got like White Zombie and I Walked with a Zombie. But yeah, Romero's title, I think, was the first one, like Night of the Living Dead. But then, referring to them as zombies in there. And then in subsequent movies, referring to them as that, like really kind of started teasing out that mythos a lot more.
And we talked about this a little bit when that article came out about elevated horror. This idea, the kind of silly article that had a couple weeks in the limelight. But what was interesting about that was this idea that the difference with George Romero's work, and I said at the time, and I really think that's why he's special, is he was never scared of the genre and pulp. He will give you the stuff you want from a horror film. He's not trying to hold that back, but he will also give you the, in quote marks, elevation, the idea, the bigger thing. And he had no problem with that. He was like, he would relish in the horror part. And I think what we get now are people who will give you that little bit of the horror thing tentatively, but they're really trying to give you the idea. That's not what it was. Like Romero fully embraced once he started making, I mean, sure, like all of our favorite directors, he also wanted to do other things and never really could. But he never turned his back on actually just going in and just enjoying the pulpier aspects of what makes a good horror film, because he also knew that had to satisfy people. It wasn't enough to give a message, you know?
Sure. And, it's funny, I'm not to deviate too much, but it's funny you mentioned that article, because, of course, one thing we didn't mention at the top of this episode is this ridiculous notion that it is like, people refuse to call it a horror movie, even though the author... What? Everyone's referring to either people, like, it's hilarious. People are referring to it a psychological thriller in either reviews, or it looks like people that are, no offense, millennials, because they can't spell properly. And as we coined on my recent shoot, that millennial is code word for young person I don't like. But anyway, but no,
we like you millennials.
Old man Rob.
Get off my lawn.
I hashtagged it with "get off my lawn." But anyway, the reason I'm bringing that up is because what the argument is bringing up, and Brian Collins wrote a great piece on Birth Movies Death, is that people are scared to call something a horror movie because the general consensus is that horror means like not really good. Like they're like, no, it's got like great characters and like suspense and like it's a psychological thriller. It's like, so basically it's good. And to bring it back around, that's the thing is Romero movies are horror movies, but they're good. They're thoughtful. The zombies are secondary. You care about the characters.
Performances are great.
The performances are it's always beyond what the horror is.
And he has his two, and these I will say, like, we were supposed to bring the three films from Romero that kind of mean the most to us, and these are two of mine, but he has both Martin and Season of the Witch, which are about major social issues and people functioning in these kind of social problems, and then there's horror in them, but it's rather secondary, and the horror is just the vehicle to get you to the social problem, not unlike Night of the Living Dead. And so the very first time I saw Season of the Witch was in college in a feminist film class. Someone showed me that. And if at the time you had like showed it to me and then said, who made this? I would have never guessed Romero.
Well, yeah. And if somebody said that about Season of the Witch, I'd be like, sure, that might not be a horror film. That's like a fringe, that's borderline, whether it's horror or not. I'd probably say it's probably not really a horror film.
Yeah, but Night of the Living Dead is a horror movie.
Yeah, but it
is a horror movie.
It is completely.
There's nothing about that I could even, I can't even see the other side of that argument.
Yeah.
I wish I could. Yeah. I can't even see where you could, I mean, everything about it is a horror film. Now, what they could be saying is it didn't scare them, and that's a problem for them. That's their problem. I'm sorry, that's not the film's problem. You know what I mean?
You got personal problems.
Well, like what scares you when you watch a lot of horror? Come on. Like most of us aren't going to get that scared from most horror films.
So do we want to delve into our personal favorites or three favorites?
Totally.
Should we go one around the table?
Sure.
Let's do it.
All right.
They'll all probably collide, though, right?
Yeah.
If
they do collide, then we can just talk about it. But yeah.
Well, for me, I'm going to go Martin for sure. And
Martin's my number one.
Martin's my number two.
One? Wow. All right. So
Martin's not even into my top 3.
Not in your top 3. All right, well, Ryan, you could sit this one out. We got this. No, I mean, here's the thing. Martin, the power of Martin is mainly because I just revisited it not too long ago. And because Romero's filmmaking style was, it's interesting because I don't want this to come across the wrong way, but he fell somewhere in between a professional filmmaker, but also in that low budget indie world where it almost seems possible. It's almost like when you see early Sam Raimi, like you're like, oh, like this was made by like somebody I could know, and yet it's got flourishes and touches of professionalism. So I always thought like the early stuff had that, where it was like this weird raw quality to it.
And his documentary type work is coming through.
Yeah.
Where I didn't really believe like, well, this isn't a Hollywood movie, but it's the guy that has an eye. And so Martin I always appreciated as a kid. But it's really, I think, I'm waiting for more vampire stuff. And the whole idea is that we don't know if Martin's a vampire or not. He thinks he is. And so when I revisit it now as an adult, I just fell in love with the idea of just the themes that he was playing with, where in particular, Martin thinks he's a vampire. He wants to feed on people's blood. And he imagines this whole scenario in his head before he does it. It's all beautiful and like operatic and all that. And then, of course, he snaps out of it and he goes to commit the murder, and it's messy and ugly and doesn't go over well at all. And I'm just like, wow, that's amazing. That's cinematic. That's amazing filmmaking right there. And so I've always loved it, but now more than ever, I have such an appreciation for how different and unique it was on the heels of Night of the Living Dead.
Yeah, I love the romanticized ideas
and
even the way they shoot them. But I also just love it as a coming-of-age film. You know what I mean? That's one of the things. And I also love it that it's like one of those films, if you step back, you're like, oh, what's it really about? Is it just about like adults trying to stop kids from growing up? Like, is he just becoming a sexualized adult? And that's what it's really about. Like, the sex is what they're saying, vampirism. And who knows? But when I say it's my favorite, it's not like, I still think Dawn's his best film. It's, it's more just like the one. It's almost like the one now that was resonating at this point in my life when I saw it again. I was like, oh, this is such an interesting little movie, and I can't wait to watch it again on like Blu-ray one day, like just to take it in again. I think it's a great piece for all those reasons. Yeah,
I put it on my list as well for the interesting reason, just because I mean, with Dawn and Day, zombies kick ass. There's great lines. There's some really good action sequences. They're a lot of fun, and there are still some social statements in there about consumerism and things like that. But Martin is one of those where I finished watching it and was like, there is so much to unpack in this film. Like whether you're looking at, what he's saying about religion, or what he's saying about poverty or coming of age, or even identifying yourself as a monster. And I mean, ultimately Martin boils down to a serial killer, but he's a serial killer with feelings. And there's so much to unpack in there that I find the film itself really interesting. And every single time I watch it, I kind of walk away with a different take and something new that I'm suddenly like, oh, that's another layer.
And it almost feels like, if you're aware of his work, almost feels like a Hal Ashby film, or like one of those directors who weren't making horror films. So it's like kind of strange that it then has these horror flourishes. It's definitely a movie where I feel like he could have gone in a different direction after, if he had, if things had aligned. Anyway, yeah.
And even some of the cityscapes in that, they feel so frenetic yet dirty. Like the city is constantly moving, but it's just shot really ugly. And even that, like the city for me plays a character in that film just as much.
I hope that's just not Pittsburgh.
Yeah, it feels, but it feels like claustrophobic yet constantly moving. Like it's a fascinating way, the way that the city itself is presented.
Yeah, and I'm very excited for this upcoming Between Night and Dawn box set that Ara's working on, but it's just such a crime that we can't get a good version of Martin. And I mean, we might as well. I saw people debating this online, and I mean, the honest truth is that the producer that Romero was lined up with in that era, who did Dawn of the Dead and Martin, is Richard Rubinstein. And he's holding on to those movies unless
putting it very politely.
Well, he's holding on to those movies unless he gets a shit ton of money for them, and unfortunately, in this day and age, the it's not realistic. I mean, he spent millions of dollars to reconvert Dawn of the Dead into 3D, which was cool to see that way. And you guys know me, I'm the 3D guy, but I was more excited just to see Dawn on the big screen rather than seeing it in 3D.
Yeah.
Like, it adds nothing to it. And I don't know.
Nothing has happened to that since then, since we saw it last year at Beyond Fest.
And that's the thing. It's I can't imagine. I mean, putting millions of dollars into reconverting it. I don't know if you're going to get. I don't know if you're going to get those millions of dollars back. So anyway, the point being is, it's a shame that those two films will never get a proper American release, at least for now, because of who holds the rights to them. At least Dawn of the Dead got a really good Italian 4K restoration, which I picked up and had all the cuts on it. But one fine day, I'm hoping Martin will get its due.
Yeah.
In high def.
Don't worry, Rob. There's always vanilla.
I can't wait to check that out. And Ryan,
I'm going to go in chronological order. Oh, maybe not. Let me start. I mean, I want to start with one that you guys probably don't agree with. Is Knight Riders. Knight Riders.
I have to revisit it.
You need to revisit it.
Yeah, I just remember Savini in a cod piece.
Yeah, you do get that. Yes. But this is the film, if you guys don't know, is about basically a traveling show in which a bunch of basically this kind of traveling family of performers race around on motorcycles and pretend they're knights. You know, they joust, they fight, they're all led by the king, played by Ed Harris.
Yeah.
And they have a hierarchy. They actually treat it like medieval times.
Yeah.
And, you know, they live out of RVs and tents. When they go from town to town, they set up. And what I love about it is it's just kind of this kind of contemplative piece about fame. You know, it's about, you know, having something unique and family driven and something very artful, and then having an outside force come in and go, let me franchise this for you. And some of them split and go to try to franchise it, like Tom Savini does in the film. And others are more like, no, we have to stick by an honor code. And that's Ed Harris's belief, you know. They do it because, you know, for Ed Harris, it's a lot deeper. He's got other things going on. But what I really appreciate about Knight Riders is that you believe all of these characters. You can smell the atmosphere when they're putting on these shows. You can smell the popcorn and gasoline. And you believe in the interactions amongst everybody. I mean, like, there's a believability to how he depicts this world of all the performers, which is great. And there's Pat Tallman plays Patricia Tallman, who is the lead of the Night of the Living Dead 90. She's a little bit younger in this film. She kind of plays this girl that's one of the townies, and she falls in love with one of the guys, and we kind of see this world through her eyes a little bit too.
Yeah.
So, you know, Romero's kind of juggling a lot of different perspectives, from Tom Savini to Ed Harris to Pat Tallman, and it's just a fun. Like, I saw it on like a Saturday afternoon, and it was a perfect time to watch it. I just committed to it, and I was just swept up in it, you know. But I think it's really fun, and you know, it's kind of like one of those things about Romero sticking to his guns as an artist. Yeah. Like, at the end of the day, that's what I took away from it. I was like, okay, he's Ed Harris. He's sticking to his guns.
Yeah, the whole movie is an analogy for him.
Yeah, and, it's like, you know, this is the story I want to tell, and I'm going to stick to my guns. And if any fucking censors want to come in and cut my zombie movie, then fuck them. Mm-hmm. But I think it's a lot of fun. A great poster by Boris Vallejo, which has got Ed Harris just like straddling a bike.
Kind of amazing.
And some of the shit that they do on these bikes is insane. You know, I mean, like, they're literally jousting on motorcycles.
Wow,
that's a crazy idea.
It's a crazy movie. I like it, but this is one of Romero's that honestly has never clicked with me yet, and I'm still waiting for. I revisited it after he died, and it's 145 minutes long.
It is a long.
Oh my gosh!
That is a commitment. It is a commitment. Yeah.
So when you said Saturday afternoon, I'm like, that sounds about right. This is not a Friday night movie.
Yeah.
But I do appreciate. I know it's very personal to him. He said this is probably one of my most personal movies, and I see that it's really an analogy for him and his filmmaking crew. And how they approach things. But there's things I like about it. Tom Savini, as you mentioned, in kind of his little get up. and Pat Tallman has never looked better. I'm still waiting for this one to click with me, though. It hasn't happened yet. But Shout Factory put it out before there was a full Scream Factory. So there's a good blue of it out there.
Yeah, I got to see that. It's been since VHS for me.
Oh, wow.
Like, I remember not understanding it because I remember the cover going, oh, it's going to be that kind of movie. And watching it, wait, this is really real.
But that was the other thing, too, is there's a kind of the grounded nature of the film, too. When there are real stakes involved when these characters get injured. I mean, like, some of them are playing with real weaponry. Some of them are playing with padded weaponry. And that's the other great thing about it, too, is it's just the attention to detail. They're like, okay, do you want to use this? And then they're like kind of testing it out in their hand. They're like, no, if I get clubbed with that, I'm going to be out, you know? So when they do get injured, you feel it, you know?
And almost all his films fall into that category of super grounded, except, of course, his EC comic kind of stuff, which is such a surprise because it's so different in a lot of ways.
What about you, Elric?
Oh, another one? Well, Dawn.
Dawn of the Dead.
Yeah. Because I just think it's one of the best films ever made on all levels.
Same.
Has something to say.
Top 5.
It's super fun. The acting's brilliant. The action scenes are just like the action scenes are so great when the two guys are out there trying to get the trucks and you're just like rooting for them. It's like, and also seeing, you know, between Dawn and especially Day, the tone of say what Walking Dead became is just borrowing from these two movies. Literally, mostly Day, but all the best stuff in The Walking Dead appears from these two movies. And it's a real shame he never got to like say, you know, direct one or something. That would have been fun. But I just think I can't even go into it. The best analogy was it was I think 2 or 3 or 4 a.m. at an all-nighter at the Cinefamily the one year Phil had to do it there instead of the New Bev. And I was just totally ready. I'm going, perfect. 2 o'clock, I still feel good. I'm going to drive home. Can't wait to go. And kind of I don't want to say legal because, you know, you're not really because of Mr. Rubenstein. A uncut print, the British print, I guess, starts. And I just go, fuck. And I'm there till 4 something in the morning having the best time of my, like one of my favorite screenings I've ever been at, just because it's just like, the characters are great, but also, you know what, again, great female character. She's and number 3 and Day too. I love both those characters a lot. I think they're really interesting because they're not final girls in the way that we've now kind of ushered in Final Girls, which is someone super tough, probably unrealistically tough survivor in almost impossible situations against a monster. They're using their brain and social situations and grounded.
Well, I think they're more of the Linda Hamilton effect before Linda Hamilton.
Definitely. Linda Hamilton even looks like that type.
It's like survivalism at its finest, you know, where it's like they've been pushed. They've already been a final girl in maybe some other scenario, you know, in some farmhouse, but now we're getting the more seasoned, okay, we need to fight. We need to train.
And where it's really leading to with, say, The Walking Dead is this idea that you come in like your boyfriend, girlfriend, but now you're also with these 3 other strangers, and just how your social dynamics keep changing. And then your boyfriend suddenly did, and now you have to pair up with these people, and now you have to pair up with, that's the one thing Walking Dead is interesting, but unfortunately it gets bigger and bigger and doesn't really work. But that idea of your group dynamics as saying you have to kind of keep fluidly to stay alive. Right. And your relationships will have to change to these people.
Well, and that's why my number 2 is Day of the Dead. But we don't need to delve into it too much because I think it's because it was my kind of entry into him, but I love it. And Laurie Cardilli's character is the lead is just so one of my favorite like female fronted characters of a horror movie, in particular because she's the one that gets shit done. Like she's dating one of the military, you know, she's sort of with one of the military, but there's that moment when he gets bit, like, cause he freaks out and she just doesn't hesitate at all. She knocks him out, chops his arm off. They cut her eye, you know, like it's oh, that's a freaking pretty badass woman right there that's taking control of any terrible situation. And I love that analogy you just made, Ron, because I never thought of it that way, but she's already been there. She already escaped the mall or she already escaped the farmhouse and this is who she is now. And that's when we're catching up to her.
Yeah. It's that initial state, you know, final girls are always about the initial state, you know, going through hell and then coming out the other end, you know, Stretch in Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 or so on, you know. I mean, at the end of that film, she takes a chainsaw, you know, and what's the story after that? And that's kind of like the Linda Hamilton thing.
And most liberals, like, you know, were super shocked when Trump won, right? I look at Romero's 3 films and I go, this is a guy who was charting at the different types of people who would take over in these kind of situations. Each one of the films, especially look in number 2, it's the bikers, and I don't want to say white trash, but a certain type of demographic. And in Day, it's really looking at military and power and the white powerful men taking over. I mean, that film is scary.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that he never lost that kind kind of sharpness on it, because once we get to Land, it's like it clearly keeps progressing, almost kind of like foreseeing some things.
And I think I really like Land in terms of entertainment, but unlike the other three, it doesn't go for the grounded feel anymore, and the realistic performances. It's very much a heightened, more studio kind of film. It's super fun, but it does not feel in the same. It almost feels slightly a different world than those first three.
It almost does, but I think when Brian brought it up a couple months ago, I think Land is the last of those four movies are all kind of, and to me that's the dead quadrilogy. And I don't know why I just thought of Land. My favorite moment in Land is obviously I know you love the Dennis Hopper nose pick, which is pretty good. Like zombies creep me out, man. But there's one bit where he's waiting to hear word from somebody, and like one of his like lackeys comes in, and he's like, "Wait, look, what's that over there?" And he just like shoots him in the back of the head, and then 10 seconds later, he's like, "We got Dead Reckoning back." He's like, "Oh man, I wish you told me that just a few seconds earlier." I know. Like such a horrible human being, but it's so great.
He's your Trump president, so you know. But I think that shows how Romero was. Like, I think he didn't trust. Politically, he knew that progress is not a given. Like making progress is always a slippery slope, and we're always losing that progress, and you have to fight for it. And it's a pretty, it's a bold statement. I hadn't seen anything that made me feel that way until Get Out. Where you felt, again, we were all scared at the end because we knew how Night had ended, and we just assumed it would end the same way. And it was so great that it didn't. But the fact that we were all thinking it, means you've got that fear.
Get Out came out at the beginning of the year, and we've just had the year that we've had.
It's just crazy.
Art doesn't mean anything. No one listens.
Bekah, what's your, you got a 2?
Yeah, so actually Martin was my 2, so I'll now jump back to my number 1 is Season of the Witch.
Okay.
Which, as I mentioned before, I ended up seeing probably my sophomore year in college. I watched it in a feminist film class and completely loved it at the time. And I will say it is a lot more on the nose with its social messagery than a lot of other Romero films, where it literally begins with a woman in her cage while she's pleading with her husband to let her out. And literally she is just stuck in a cage.
What's the other title? Jack's Wife?
Jack's Wife. Which was given not because that was Romero's choice, but at the time when he made the movie, horror films were not performing really well, and they wanted to portray it as a domestic drama. And so they called it Jack's Wife, portraying it more as kind of like a soap opera thing.
Which is a more accurate title, really.
It actually is. She's never actually given a name through the movie. Her actual name in the movie is just Jack's Wife.
Again, she's a possession.
Yeah, a little on the nose, where they want to make sure that she is always just seen as Jack's wife throughout the entire thing. And the whole movie, I always loved kind of the environment to begin with, because it definitely feels like the swinging 70s. As you know, you're moving into like these crazy like mod parties, and everybody's kind of a little wild. But at the same time, this woman becomes really interested in witchcraft. And the further she pushes in, the more her husband's like, yeah, honey, you do your little thing, whatever it is. Yeah. He's barely around. The more she moves into the witchcraft, the more her husband kind of disparages her, and the more like weird stuff starts happening. Now, this was not the first time we've seen this. The movie Night of the Eagle did this a decade prior. But this one felt more real and less like Night of the Eagle was kind of Britishy dramatic. This one seemed almost real to me. And I absolutely love it. I love the ambiguity. I love that there's never any type of indication one way or the other, even though the film definitely goes out of its way to show that she's causing some of these events to happen. It never really answers any questions, and it really doesn't need to, because it makes it clear that the point of the movie is not whether or not she is actually a witch. It's the empowerment that she finds from it, and kind of how that plays out. And it's, even though that it's got this kind of witchcraft veneer, it's much more about her finding herself and finding a way to have an identity more than anything else.
I like that he'd want to make that movie. I like that's and Night Riders. I like that here's a guy who can make the Dawn of the Dead, but then wants to make those movies. And you're like, that's really interesting.
Well, I think that's the fire of youth. That's the fire of a youthful filmmaker who is, observing what's going on in the world and has a story to tell. You know, I mean, like I think we saw that with a lot of our, kind of masters of horror in their youth. They had some sort of anger or fire in
something
them.
to butt up against too.
Exactly. Yes, exactly.
Like now, it's true. And somebody did comment the other day, like, look, horror always is at its best and always does great under these kind of regimes.
I mean, that's what I tell them. Like when I have meetings with filmmakers, I'm like, what are you angry about?
Like,
what do you have? I mean, like, you're going to throw me a supernatural thriller, but it doesn't need to always say something political, but I mean, like, it has to come from someplace, some feeling. What's the emotion? Yeah. Rob?
Well, now I'm up to 3 because I already did 2. My 3, I'm going with The Dark Half because
bold choice.
Well, yeah, because I've always loved the combination of King and Romero, and Creepshow is definitely the perfect amalgamation of both their styles. But I remember that was the period where I was at my peak King phase, and so The Dark Half is the first book I remember when it came out, going to buy it. I was like, oh my God, there's a new Stephen King book, and now I know who this guy is, and I'm going to read The Dark Half. And so when the movie came out, I was like, oh, it's from the guy that does the Dead movies. I can't wait to see this. So I saw that in theaters, and I was all in. I remember some of the graphic stuff in the book not being in the movie, or at least not being depicted in the movie.
Like the dick getting cut.
Yeah, pretty much what happens to that. I mean, they say it, but you don't actually.
Yeah, exactly.
But I was pretty blown away by the movie as a kid, because of course as a kid you're like, oh, this is so amazing. It's an author and he's got a split personality from his book, doesn't want to die.
Double Hutton. We had Double Frank, and now we got Double Hutton.
and I mean, it's a shame that we didn't get more King stuff, because he was supposed to do Pet Cemetery. He was supposed to do Salem's Lot. He was got a 10-part It series. The Stand was one that he was going to do for a while. So it's a shame that George never got to do more of them, but at least the King we got is a really bizarre, pretty bizarre even for King. And I love Michael Rooker in it. He plays Alan Pangborn, the sheriff, who is Ed Harris in Needful Things. And I remember that being a weird thing, because those movies kind of came out pretty same year. Yeah. And I'm like, oh no, I wish he was. I was like, why isn't Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer in both movies? But I really love The Dark Half, and again, I wish he got to do more. The Blu-ray that Scream Factory put out is terrific, and it's got a pretty lengthy documentary on there. Now they touch on a little bit of how problematic that movie was to make, but I can tell you the stuff that was cut out, which is basically that Romero fought. I think Romero really wanted Timothy Hutton in the movie, and the second that Timothy Hutton got hired, he kept trying to get Romero fired.
Oh, shit.
Yeah, he was one of those super method dudes that really got into being George Stark more than anything, rather than his counterpart. And apparently, him and Romero did not get along. Again, Romero is very diplomatic about it on the Blu-ray, but the real story is that the second he started, Hutton was trying his best to fire him. And then someone who's very candid is Michael Rooker, who got along with nobody on that set. And I think he was working on a play or something at the same time. And for whatever reason, he said the other actors were super standoffish with him. Now, I love him in the movie, and I already knew him as Henry. And that just goes to show the power of George. Is George said, he's like, everyone just assumed he was Henry. He's like, but I looked at him and I was like, you know what? I see the sweet guy that could be the sheriff. And so he's like, he fought really hard for Rooker to be that character, because nobody wanted him to be that character in that movie. And so it's just fun to read up on some of the drama behind it, because I as a kid, I didn't see any of that. I saw everything Romero saw. I saw oh, that guy is going to be good as George Stark, and Michael Rooker, he is a sweet, sympathetic sheriff. So I think that all works. So, yeah, if you haven't seen it in a while, it's definitely worth a revisit.
I haven't seen it in a long time, but I liked the book a lot when I read it.
Yeah.
I liked the movie, but I remember feeling it didn't fully work when I saw it, a long time ago.
Right.
But, yeah, I'd be curious to see it on Blue.
Sure.
My last one of the 3 is just obvious Creepshow. Creepshow to me is still something. That's the kind of all his movies, it's the one I kind of want to rewatch the most. Every year, pretty much, I would rewatch that, and parts of it. It's the style is so much fun. It's so interesting, and it's probably a story too long, but then there's no story I'd cut. So it's one of those great conundrums. Nope, I'm leaving all of these in here. I'd probably be as you mentioned, probably because there's a repetitive theme of the dead coming back to life with 2 of the stories, but just the style of it is so different from the other stuff he did, and it's just so much fun. It's the ultimate for me. Obviously, the first horror, but also really I could see it as being the ultimate gateway for a lot of people, because it's also scary. There's scary images in it, but they're also cartoony, so it blurs the line for a young mind of what that is. And I just think it's such a great anthology too. I mean, it's definitely my favorite anthology.
Yeah, Creepshow was my number 3, just because it was so accessible to me when I was a kid, and it was a movie that I still have fun watching.
watching now. I will watch Creepshow anytime.
Nielsen's still great now. I'll watch Leslie Nielsen, and that's hilarious.
Oh, my
It's
God,
just
he's
one of
so
those films that even if I'm like going through channels and I'm like, oh, Creepshow's on.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to watch this, but Creepshow's on. So I'm watching this now. Like, it's still every single time I watch it, it's a treat.
I'm still crossing my fingers that one of you is going to go Monkey Shines. I just want somebody to start talking.
I think we're done.
There's only one. Yeah, there's only one left. I mean, I was going to Dawn of the Dead was my second, and Creepshow is my number 3. But I do want to throw in on Crazies. The Crazies, I think, is still a fantastic film. And it's such a frustrating experience watching it because it just goes to show how kind of fucked up the process of the military and the government can be. Because you're watching basically a bunch of townies try to escape the quarantine of their town while everybody's losing their minds. And meanwhile, you've got military coming in, and the military is confused about like who's infected, who's not, what's the process of getting the cure going, you know. Meanwhile, Romero keeps cutting back to this kind of very claustrophobic curtained room where a bunch of government officials are like, well, how do we take care of this? Well, we could drop a bomb, or what, we got our best doctor down there, he's working away. And then, you know, the military kind of establishing its presence and, you know, kind of cutting through the woods and gathering up at the locals. But anytime they need to talk to one another, they have to run it through some kind of wire service that the government oversees because it's got to be cleared. And you're sitting there going, oh my God, they're never going to get any communication through these barriers whatsoever. So it's just kind of like a trifecta of frustrating elements from, you know, our main characters who you definitely feel for, you know, that just want to survive. And then the military and their confusion. And there's a little bit of sympathy for those poor saps because they're like, they don't know what the hell's going on. They've never encountered anything like this on home soil before, you know, to the government, they're just sitting around smoking cigarettes and throwing ideas at the wall. And because of these kind of elements, I think it's just I remember the first time I watched it, it really resonated and really disturbed me because I was like, oh my God, what if it felt to me more real than obviously the zombie apocalypse that George depicted. It was like, no, this is something that gets into your water and gets into your system and messes with your brain.
This is Flint, Michigan.
This is Flint, Michigan shit. Exactly. So I thought there are a lot of George Romero acting troupe performers that are in it. There's a lot of recognizable faces, so there was kind of a little bit of glee watching that going backwards. But
I always thought that and Rabid had the same aesthetic, and it felt like they existed in the same world. Like she would just drive by with
somewhere in Canada.
Yeah, it's really weird. They must have been made right around the same time, but they're saying about even the film stock. It's like these two movies look so similar, which is they're interesting. So no Monkey Shines.
No Monkey Shines.
But that's our runner-ups.
It's a super fun.
Scream Factory did a great release. And that's when I really appreciated when I had that Blu-ray of it. And then even the making of stuff about dealing with that freaking monkey is pretty hilarious.
What about the remakes of his work? Do you feel like any of them have been wholly successful? Because there's parts of them that
I did like the new Crazies.
Yeah.
Like I thought it was.
I think that's a more entertaining film than his, obviously, but his wasn't there to entertain. And the first 20 minutes of Dawn is obviously really quite incredible.
I think the Dawn of the Dead remake is great.
Overall, it's solid.
I think it's very good. I think it holds up. I haven't seen it in a while because when it came out, I watched it a lot just to kind of get into it. But the Crazies, going back to the Crazies really quick, it just felt like it was one of those perfect amalgamations of new and old. You know, same old idea, but with a little bit more testosterone and more of an action movie. Which I thought was really great.
And I liked the setting for that one. I mean, like it was always set in a small town, but I think that the remake really played out like there is nothing happening in this town, and then this is the last place on earth you would suspect that this would happen. Yeah. So I liked how they kind of pushed that a bit more.
For me, I mean, I have a very, very distinct and fond memory at the height of my horror fandom, especially zombie stuff, is going to see Night of the Living Dead 1990 in theaters. And I still to this day think that's a pretty solid remake.
Really good.
I love Patricia Tallman. I love the version of Barbara that's in that. Of all the actors in the world that could fill Dwayne Jones' shoes, Tony Todd does a pretty killer job.
He does, yeah.
I mean, he is great in that movie.
And the effects are really creepy. They're creepy
The
zombies.
effects are great. If you have the original DVD or even the Blu-ray now, I think Umbrella, this Australian company, has an all region of it. You could see there's a little featurette that shows you the deleted scenes. Well, not deleted scenes, but the MPAA really came down hard on them because obviously it's Romero's name and Tom Savini, and they went out unrated on Dawn of the Dead. So they really cut back the gore effects, which, again, if you got somebody like Savini directing, you know the gore is going to be spectacular. And so it's a shame that there's no way to make like a super uncut version of it, but on its own, as its own movie, I think it's really solid. And it's what I like about remakes, which is, yeah, you could tell the same story, but what are the twists and turns can you make? Because I think the ending of the 1991 is a really cool twist on what the original one was. And again, I like that version of Barbara. I mean, she's awesome. Yeah. And there's some fun stuff in it.
I remember, I think the very first Fangoria I ever purchased for myself was Night of the Living Dead 90 on a cover. And I remember, didn't they use computer effects to help design the zombies? I remember there's an article, because I remember looking at the article and it was like, this film is pushing zombie cinema into new territory, and here are the two men behind it. And it was like two guys standing in front of a computer. And
but only in design, not in
only
actual
in design.
Execution,
Exactly.
Which is kind of yeah, because they did some fun stuff. Like there's like a weird, skinny, shirtless, like he's almost bordering on like he looks like an Ethiopian.
Well, he pops into the doorway and he's like,
and it's the first time you see squibs on bare flesh.
Yes,
you know, and it's like, wow, they actually were pushing the envelope in terms of what can we do effects wise in there. But there's some good stuff. I mean, it's nice to see Bill Moseley and Johnny Roll at the beginning. Like that's pretty. He's pretty great in that.
Yeah.
So that's probably my favorite remake.
Something I hadn't
think
read
paired up with the original would be a great double bill.
Oh yeah, that'd be. Yeah, I really like that remake. Something I hadn't read before, which is so obvious, but like I just because of the timing of the film, I read how big an influence Carnival of Souls was on George. Yeah. And when you hear that, it's just confirmation because you see it all over Night of the Living Dead. But because the movies are that far apart, I didn't even really think about it. Makes a lot of sense. I just also think it's cool, just like when Wes and obviously Toby, when the people are like as nice as they are. These are people like that you hear only, I mean, George, I have never heard a negative thing about him from anyone ever. Like just only the best stories.
Yeah, I only met him in the convention setting, where it was 2 seconds.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
he said, like, oh, thank you so much for everything. And he had that sweet uncle quality to him, and I think that's one of the things that's making it difficult for us to when we lose these guys is because we didn't know them personally, but we grew up with their films and they felt like I wish he was my uncle. I wish I had somebody that cool in my family that I could talk to.
It looks like he was born 45. And like I've never seen any photo of him. I'm always like, yeah, you look about 45. Is at a certain point.
One of the candid stories I have is when I was interviewing him on that Diary of the Dead. I remember he sat down, he was comfortable, and he was like, Ryan, I came up with this idea while taking a shower. And I was like, I've never started an interview that way. And he's like, yeah. And he kind of like launched into it a little bit. And then he just like laughed and he goes, how's that mental image for you? And I was like, not so good. Not so good. He was just fun. He was just fun to talk to.
Yeah.
Ryan, I know you touched on it briefly in a previous episode, but I was actually hanging out with Ben from Fright Rags, who's in town this week. And
for Slashback.
And he lives over in Rochester, New York, and he said he drove up to Canada for Romero's memorial. And the way he described it was really amazing. And I was wondering if you could talk about it because I know you made an appearance too. Yeah. And this was a thing that was basically, it was a wake.
It was a wake.
Open to the public.
Oh, no, absolutely.
With his wife and kids there.
Absolutely, yeah. I was going to say advertised, but that feels cold. But it was, the wording had gotten out as a fan memorial. A lot of the imagery that was going on social media was like, come to the fan memorial here in Toronto, pay your respects, da-da-da-da. And so I didn't expect what I expected, which is when I arrived, it was a full-on, it was a wake. And I went about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Everybody was still at work, and it was raining, of course, and I ran into Ben there. And you walked into the funeral home, and they had, off to the left, they had a television that was playing. wasn't Creepshow. I'm blanking on what they were playing, but they had something playing there. Then you walked deeper into the funeral home.
Oh, it was one of his favorite movies.
It was.
I wish I could remember what Ben told me what it was.
Tales of Hoffman, maybe. By the Red Shoes guys, because I've always read him talk about.
Yeah, I don't know. But then they had a lot of framed photographs, framed illustrations from when he was a kid, little cartoons that he drew. And he was
it The Quiet Man? Because he listened to The Quiet Man score.
That might have been it, actually.
Maybe. So they had like cartoon, little kitty cartoons that he drew, and then you walked into the main portion of the funeral home, and they had like rope set up so you can like walk in line, and there was his coffin.
Whoa.
And just above it was a giant screen with a projection of Creepshow.
Yeah.
So, you couldn't help but smile because you were like, you walked in and you were kind of just hit with total sadness. And then you looked up and you were like, yeah, of course Creepshow's playing.
Yeah.
And it kind of made you feel a little bit better. But as you walked around, they had a statue from when he became an official Canadian citizen.
Yeah.
It was like Toronto welcomes George Romero, and it was like a hand or something like that.
Yeah.
And then there were like a lot of George Romero dolls, like fan-made dolls and zombies and stuff like that. But yeah, I got that was the only one that was in there, and his wife and kids were there, and I just kind of walked up and introduced myself, and we talked, we just shared a few George Romero recollections, and they just told me, they were like, listen, it's guys like you and the fans that really kept him going, and thank you for coming. And
I think that's so amazing, man.
Yeah.
Ben told me a story that when he showed up, it was like not that many people there, so he like walked up and talked to his wife.
Yeah.
And like, I've never met this woman before, but mentioned we worked on a few shirts that George really liked, and she's like, oh my god. So I think it's amazing that they bridged the gap between fans and family and friends and everything.
Totally. No, it was great. Off to the left of the coffin was the Misfits had created a floral bouquet that was in the shape of the Fiend face.
Right.
So it was the Misfits Fiend face. It was black and white, and it was like, this is for George, because George had a great tight relationship with them. He had directed a music video for them. He used some of their music in Bruiser, but it was. I'm glad I made the trek out because I wasn't even planning on making a trip into Toronto. I was somewhere else.
You were at Fantasia with me because you came up to me on the last day and you were like, we were supposed to be on the same flight back. And you were like, well, change plans. I'm going to Toronto. And I was like, okay, cool.
So I dropped in on set where we were shooting something and then dropped over there just for that. I just wanted to really go and pay my respects.
And another good thing to watch for people if they maybe haven't seen Document of the Dead.
Oh,
if you really want to see something.
That's what was planned. Thank you. That is what was playing when you first walked in.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
By our guest number 4 back on Killer POV or something, right?
Oh, God.
He directed it.
Was it
Roy
Frumkes?
Yeah, Frumkes made it.
Well, Frumkes made it, but did you have him on at one time?
Yeah,
we had him on Killer POV.
First couple episodes.
Yeah.
And by the way, I was just curious because I haven't seen Bruiser in years. I want to revisit it. It's on Amazon Prime right now.
Yep.
Well,
so that is
good
getting
time
added
to revisit
my
Bruiser.
Getting added there. We can go on and on, but let's open it up to our listeners and people in the group, and let's hear your stories about George, and let's get your top 3. And look, we're here because of this man.
Yeah,
undoubtedly. Pure celebration. I mean, you get sad losing anyone, but like I feel these guys are they lived great lives. They had great lives and left amazing legacies.
Yes.
Like incredible filmography with George. So.
To wrap it up, don't forget to visit us on social media, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And don't forget to leave us a review on iTunes, either a star rating or, leave us a few words.
And if you're interested in advertising on Shockwaves, please reach out to us at shockwaves@blumhouse.com.
Holy cow, it was like Bekah left her body and became this other angelic being.
It was kind of like Escape from New York when Snake is walking down the hallway and they're like talking about processing prisoners. And I was just like, wait a second, where's that coming from?
Where'd Bekah go?
I know, right?
Holy shit.
Thanks, guys. We'll see you next week. Bye.